Gentlemen, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's good to see you guys. And what are we doing here today? We're here to make masculinity divine again. And I'm really excited to introduce my friends here. We got Benjamin Balderson, we got John McGee, we got Gabriel Slick Dissident, we got Alan Marcus, and we got Joshua the Branch. Good to see you guys. I'm really excited to chat about all things masculinity, divine masculinity, and all the different threads and directions that we can go into here. And I just want to open up by reading a quote. This is a very peculiar book in a very peculiar niche in the quote unquote manosphere. It's called Bronze Age Mindset. And this is a story that reminds me of Hercules. I just want to read this to you guys and then we can go from there. It says, in the Stone Age, man appears, very strong shoulders with a club in his hand. He is believed by these people to be a son of some god, of a mortal woman who cucked her husband with a god. As a child, he already displayed superhuman strength. When he grows, he goes into the deepest wild to fight great cave lions. And he emerges from these caves with the skin of every lion on his back. The lions had been eating and working terror into these people, but now he is wearing this terror on his shoulders. He carries the lion mane on his head, the lion pelt on his back, and a great club in his hand. This man comes to be worshipped by the people. His progeny becomes lines of kings of Sparta and many other places. What was his act of foundation? He slaughtered monsters. He made the seaways known to man and tamed the rock face. But don't forget the lion skin atop of his shoulders. This was the lion of Nemea. Do you understand what nemesis is? There is within nature a great purgative function. Think about a lake. If there is an overpopulated lake of reptiles, when there's some type of surplus, eventually this will trigger a response. A monster will be born. A lizard, many times the size of the other reptiles, will be born, who will deal out great destruction and cull the entire lake. The Greeks believed in this great power and worshipped its justice. In the Bible, it appears as allegory of the flood, which in fact refers to the irrepressible spirit of the sea peoples and the divine justice that they brought to cities whose life had grown pointless and a great ugliness on the world. You bring a lion cub into this house, and eventually it will become a priest of doom when it reaches age. This irrepressible force, this natural divine culling is what we are up against here. And I'm curious what that sparked within you guys. And so, Joshua, I want to thank you again. I want you to maybe go into what came up for you. And also, just to point this out, I mean, you had a great idea of doing this masculinity stream to talk about what we face and what we see in our culture. And I'm really curious how you would like to begin this conversation tonight.
Well, thank you again. I have to say what triggered this was growing a beard because had always shaved, not necessarily to conform, but um, just because it seemed inconvenient, or something like that. And it wasn't until I kind of, the weather was getting cold and I was just kind of being lazy, really, I guess, in a way. But what I realize now is I was really just in tune because I was observing the wildlife and noticed the deer were getting antlers at this time. And I thought, wait a second, is a beard antlers on us? Because it's made of the same thing. I mean, we look at it and it's pliable and it's hair, so we don't really think of it being the same thing. But keratin and biotin, all those things are the same constituents. And a horn is living inside. It's a cuticle, and so it's more like our fingernails in a sense, right? So I just think it's interesting that the horns are shed during a certain period of time in the year too, and so that seems to coincide with the sunlight. As the sun begins in Aries, they don't have horns, but then toward the fall, they start to get their horns, and then they have them through the winter. And I'm just really interested in that cycle. And I think that that might be the divine masculine cycle, where women have a monthly cycle each month in the 28-day period. I think men are probably operating on a yearly type cycle like that. And when I made, yeah, exactly. And then when I made that connection, which reminds me of that Jägermeister emblem, right? Um, and once I
Yeah.
made that connection, then I realized, oh, okay, so maybe there's some like wisdom to be gained by growing this beard out and just kind of experiencing that, right? And in times past, I may not have been able to grow a full beard, but it seems as though it's so easy and simple just to grow like a full beard without even trying. And I started contemplating all these things that I would have never thought about otherwise. And then I began to feel like the wind in my beard and things like that. And I was like, wow, all these weird experiences. And I began to understand that maybe as I'm aging, I'm 37 now, that as I get closer to that magic age of 42, which is like when you're allowed to start studying Kabbalah and Zohar and stuff like that, like there's something that happens to your mind. And I think it's because of like when you see these deer walk around with the huge racks of horns, it's like something happens to where you gain like a density of testosterone or something like that. And I think it changes your mind. But that's when certain fruit can start to form. And I think that that is kind of emblematic of when we see the old man with the beard. That's that archetype where he has wisdom as well. So I think that's why we kind of associate horns with wisdom, is because in a person though, it's more like a beard instead of the horns. So I had all these epiphanies and I thought, oh, wow, so I wanted to have a stream of bearded men talking about the divine masculine, because I figured we all had different backgrounds and different experiences with it. And of course, we all can agree, I think, that it's in jeopardy. No matter how we individually define it, we can all sense that, I think. So, and I've always been a fan of nature, how you can look at it and study it. And you're mentioning July earlier. I don't know if we were recording yet, but that's the time of the buck rabbit, which is the male rabbit. So there's another virility, fertility type symbol. And so yeah, I would just like to spend some time maybe focusing on all the different esoteric qualities, the physical things, biochemistry. I mean, we got a list here that will probably be hitting on several different topics. But yeah, I tried to pull together like the Space Jam Dream Team so we could play a game against the space aliens.
Brilliant, brilliant. Good to see you tonight, and I'm really happy because you brought up a lot of cool points already. But we're barely getting started here, and it's exciting to think about how we can be of service to the community. Ladies and gentlemen listening, we can all appreciate the divine masculine, and of course, we're going to be talking about the divine feminine as we go on tonight. But it's going to be nice to look at some of these esoteric angles, like you said. And Mr. Balderson, what do you think about all this so far? What's on your mind, my friend?
I enjoyed what Joshua said. I always enjoy Joshua. Um, I found that very interesting, the age thing. And there are a lot of different cultures that until you're about 40, right around 40, things don't really settle the same. Um, I would say that the winter time is the high feminine, in my opinion. And them antlers, that's the winter time is more of your etheric time, your feminine time, when you sit around and you think and uh, you plan, because you can't be out doing. And so when the shaman in most of your European cultures, the shaman will wear the antlers, and that specifically because it's to try and get that connection to the etheric realm, which is always coming into its height at winter, when winter time's beginning. At the end of fall there is when you're looking at. And so I just thought that was all really great. And I just can't tell if it's a girl or a dude without a beard anyway, so I don't know. Is that like your first step to becoming transsexual? I don't know.
Well, that's actually an interesting topic, because wasn't Odin known as being like I don't want to say a blend of the two sexes necessarily, but wasn't it common in Norse for like, he was trying to access the women's feminine magic energy, which he could only do with runes, right? He couldn't do it otherwise.
Not with the runes. So the runes is Galder, and Galder is the masculine side of things. The masculine side of things is always very structured, very step by step. You do this thing, you expect this result. Where the feminine side is called scythe or scyther, and that's chaotic. That's more the monkey's paw type situation where, hey, I want this result, and the step by step part in between is kind of, well, how it happens, it happens. And so Odin practiced both sides of the magic. And in the exoteric understanding, then that leads a lot of people into believing then that Odin practiced a lot of feminine things. But I also work on the scyther side of things, and I don't run around dressing like a woman. I don't do a lot of really feminine things. That's just, it's just an exoteric understanding of delving into the feminine side of things instead of doing it in the masculine side.
So we're kind of doing that when we study the occult, basically, in a sense.
Yes.
So, Mr. Slick Dissident, when Joshua and Balderson were just talking, I was thinking about Hermes, because Hermes is another figure that could represent this hermaphroditic, this union of masculine and feminine. I was curious if you had any thoughts on Hermes in relation to this weave about Odin that Balderson has just brought up as well. What do you think?
I definitely think part of that, what is called androgynous, is essentially, being able to see through the other person's eyes. The meeting in the middle, the visa capaces, the common mutual ground. I think that's very much the redeeming value of that concept. And a lot of people get all, uneasy in their britches about it. But, we all see, through each other's eyes. And being able to see the way that a woman sees the world is a very helpful thing. If you want to hunt one down and keep one for yourself, you gotta think like your prey, so to say. So yeah, that's how you bring home the bacon. you gotta know what flavor bacon she likes.
You have to see their view.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like you said,
my wife doesn't
seeing
like
through their
bacon. She
eyes.
likes Wagyu steaks.
Oh, you want me to open it?
Now, is this going to become a talk about marriage counseling and how to pick up a woman, or is this going to focus on the divine masculine? I think my answer is going to be quite clear. The divine masculine is one that isn't peacocking and chasing after women. I think what is not divine masculine then is that man which is seeking pleasure and a hedonistic lifestyle beyond his means and before he's worked for it. There's a time to rest and a vacation period. But for those who haven't worked for it and they've spent that time just vacationing and thinking they're going to retire before the age of whatever, 24, because they're a crypto investor or something, there's a realistic aspect to maturity. And if we're talking about the patriarchs in the Bible and the paintings of presidents and their masculine features, we live in a very visual culture where everyone has a camera, multiple cameras probably, in all of their pockets, and their Janko jeans and their fashions and whatever they're wearing at the time, their fanny packs. They're holding a purse, man purse, a merce or something to that effect. You know, they wear the fashions of the day, and that's really not having to do with masculine or feminine. Those are other decisions. So we're not going to get caught up on whether men can wear high heels or not because they wore them at a certain period of time. Divine masculine is outside of time. So there's a painting by Michelangelo. I think painting and art is a very masculine thing, to create something and to reflect beauty. A lot of men today will focus on creating anime art and Rule 34 and hentai and all this sort of like feminized stuff, and it's, well, hold on there, man, you're not quite Frank Frazetta yet, so don't try and model women and that sort of thing. So again, back to the basics and the idea of 42 and reaching a mature age. So this would be the message to young men who are in this place of confusion and depression and nihilism, to think, oh, you know, you know, it's just not even worth living. I should just end it now. Well, you know, maybe your brain hasn't fully developed yet. I think that's part of the masculinity, is waiting for your brain to develop, understanding the physiology and the anatomy of the body. That's reading the instruction manual. You know, if this was a Bible study, they'd say, well, read the Bible. If this was the Dr. Oz show, he'd say, I've got a book and you can read it, and Oprah will give it to you if you appear on her show, and this sort of thing. It's like reading the manual to understand something is a very masculine thing to do, wanting to understand the philosophy and then having the maturity to realize that there are multiple points of view, to not settle upon the first thing you read, which is leading to my final point in my little monologue here with myself, which is me standing on stage and puffing myself up
Are you
and
mansplaining?
wanting to be in the spotlight, right? That's sort of maybe that's more of a feminine trait. Who can say, you know? But the point being that, you know, you got to go through the steps. You have to reach that age of maturity. And for some people, they're like, well, you know, 18, 21, I can drink alcohol. I'm a man now. You know, I've slept with a woman. I've slept with 3 women. I've slept with 10. And you start, you know, making marks on your bedpost. Well, those are not indicators of maturity. Age is just a number. You have to go through the steps, the trials, the tribulations, and those rituals to reach whatever it is. So it's a goal. I think divine masculinity is a goal to be achieved, and not something that you check off of a list because you put an ice bucket over your head and you jumped in for a polar plunge, and then you Snapchatted it and Instagrammed it and made sure everybody knew what you were doing every moment of your life.
Some heavy hitter
Impress me
points
the
right
more,
there.
The longer I know you.
Mr. McGee, I have a quick question for you. And this is something that we had touched on. And it's funny that Alan brought up the fact that divine masculinity is outside of time. And yet here we are in the 3D world where masculinity does follow some kind of cycle. Every November, we have No Shave November on the exoteric side and No Nut November on the esoteric side. What do you make of all that?
Honestly, it seems like something to do with your body chemistry around that time of year. It's just, it matures. And if you squander your fluids, I think that you miss out on that maturity. And it seems like both of these subjects are like popularized type of things to do every single year, but I don't think people really get the underlying I don't know if achievement is the word, but what you get if you do participate in these things. Now he said something, Mr. Allen, he said something about we're not gonna touch like on like high heels and stuff like this. But I think that like that's honestly something that we should touch on though as well, because as a man, and I would say the average man, we're attracted to certain traits in a woman, and the feminists, they don't reflect any of these traits. You know what I mean? Physically.
Very
I think
interesting.
it's
Yeah.
important to touch on both sides. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Not just not just like the esoteric side, but also the exoteric. You know?
Well, that's interesting because, for instance, I've often wondered why people may cross dress. Like, do they enjoy trying to gain attention or something? And if they do, there's some like weird intrinsic dopamine hit thing going on. So I sometimes wonder about that because
That is.
women do have like the inherent quality of attraction that men don't seem to have. For instance, like I think most everybody could agree that a woman's beautiful, but not everybody would necessarily agree with that a man is beautiful, even if he is the most beautiful man. Because I think inherently women have that quality of beauty that even women can appreciate, whereas men are like, wow, I'm not attracted to a man. I don't care how pretty he is. So I think it's
Yeah.
interesting how
I
some
mean, I don't agree with that at all.
Oh, okay. Well, how so?
Like, you've never been in a room with a dude that's just a raging stud beast and you don't know it.
Well, I can
Like,
recognize him as being
wow,
a
dude, you were a
dude, but what I mean
beast.
is like
Like, you don't immediately feel that dude's just a beast. You're like, you know, and I understand there's a real, because we're such a neutered society, that, and so many of them are closet homosexuals, that they've got that there's a lot of homosexual fear, but I don't. Like, I've showered with probably 10,000 different dudes. Like, I've done all kinds of different things. Like, this wasn't things where guys were uncomfortable with it at different points in times. Like, when you're in the army, you're not worried about,
Yeah.
you know, a dude doing something that, oh man, and when a dude's a beast, you know it. Every other dude knows it. Every chick in the room wants him. Every dude in the room wants to be him.
Yep.
well, I guess what I was meaning is like more so when a man chooses to look like a woman because he knows that he can capture that type of attention that he wouldn't be able to get maybe if he were just a man, for instance. And that's more what I was explaining, not so much the other. But
But he wouldn't have gotten that attention as a man because he's not enough of a man.
well,
So
yeah,
he
that's what I
chooses
mean.
to,
So he's
to
like
do an alternative. Right.
like a
Right. I get what you're
spectrum that
saying.
he's kind of sliding himself on to
Yeah.
kind of like capture that adoration.
Right.
But and by that same token, I think that maybe men can exude some other type of energy, but maybe it's hard to put the finger on it, so to speak. But I just feel like women kind of sometimes embody that. Maybe it's the Sid here that we were kind of talking about. There's like mystery or something, some type of an allure.
I had
Is that
It
heard
also
reminds me of like the
Prince
hair
David?
bands of the 80s.
the glam rockers, yeah, and I had heard something earlier today talking
Yeah,
about the Kardashians being a very visual aspect of our culture, knowing what a Kardashian looks like with the cosmetic lines, and of course
Yeah.
the Olympic medalist Bruce Jenner being part of that family. And the theory goes that I was listening to
okay.
has to do with him being in front of all these cameras, not receiving a lot of screen time and attention. And then as soon as he sat down and said, "Do my makeup, put a
Oh
dress on
man.
me," he
Well,
started
that's
to
a
get more
perfect example.
attention. And then he continued to go with that and allowing them. So that's sort of a boyhood thing where
Yeah.
boys are like, I don't know how to relate to women, but if I, I've got long hair, and they're like, can I braid your hair? Well, yeah, I mean, I can let a girl touch me. She's gonna braid my hair. Oh, you got nice cheekbones. I could put a little blush on there, and she starts to do your makeup. So now she's like, you're hanging out with the girl, you're getting to know her, but
You know what's really
we're
odd, Alan?
mhm.
Bruce Jenner and I went to the same high school, and he received accolades. There were banners of his successes of track. Like, he was a
As a
sprinter,
male
I think.
athlete, yes.
Yes. So he achieved some type of greatness, at least in his peer group with the other athletes. And yet
Sure.
you're kind of hitting at this core this core issue here. Like
Right.
we maybe we're talking about some kind of boundary that
It's the divine masculine being this object, this focus, this goal that you have towards achieving. And throughout your life, there's going to be stages and tests and trials, and you might be swayed by something. You might face a temptation that might bring you down to the ground, and you might hit rock bottom, and you might start drinking and finding coping mechanisms and drugs and alcohol and all these things that get you off your path and away from your purpose.
So now, Gabriel, you had brought up the sirens, and when Alan brings up temptation, the siren song is what I immediately think about in a mythological sense. And I'm curious, how would you start to weave in this? It could be feminine temptation. Maybe that's the aspect that it takes on, especially with the sirens. But what do you think about that whole mythological trope?
This a few months ago, about 5 months back, I was going through the story of the Odyssey with what's his name? I always want to call him Oedipus, but that's not it. Odysseus. Thank you.
Odysseus, yes.
Thank you. And I was tracking it through the sky clock. As the story rolls out, I was essentially watching the constellations become embedded into the story chronologically, just flowing right with time. And sure enough, as he goes through November, he's passing over the Lyra constellation. In the time of the story where he and his shipmates are going to go past the Harpies, and the Lyra constellation is a harp. And so the Harpies' song was tempting him to come ashore and be ravished by the Harpies, like every man has in the past. They have they never miss. The Harpies always get their target. But he was forewarned because up in Virgo, the Gorgon had told him about this spell. So he told his shipmates to put wax in their ears and to tie him to the mast of the boat so that he could have his ears open and actually hear their song and persevere. And what's really fascinating about this is it's the master boat. He's tied to the mast of the boat. And this is a metaphor for the urge, the desire, the call of the temptation that oftentimes will result in a fantasy that so many of us have experienced. And it's even so it's not only the master boat, which is really fascinating because linguistically this is going from, we're told it went from Greek to English. How is this how does this strange little Twilight language still convey the message? And that's a mystery for everybody to deal with on their own. But the other thing that came to me in the same time I was doing that research, it was a little bit before November when I was digging into it, but the part about the beard, the no shave November comes to mind. And I had just learned that in the Solabuska deck that the imagery of a man stroking a long beard was occulted signaling for masturbation because it's a form of self-soothing. And ever since I learned that, I haven't stopped stroking my beard one fucking bit. I probably do it twice as much now that I think about it. But the funny thing is, like, it's to the extent that when I see somebody else doing it in a video, I feel the urge to do it, and I don't even think about it. I'll be watching a video, but oh yeah,
everyone give yourself a nice stroke right now. Just relish it.
Well, and that's No Shave November, which is to raise awareness of men's health issues, including prostate. So men know where their prostate is and what they can do with it on their own time.
Yes. And
I mean, it's super interesting, the whole no nut November part, because when you look at the way if you ever read the Salts of Salvation and the Zodiac, November is where after you've done, so your bodily fluids and your cell salts start out in the cerebrum and cerebellum, and they move down. And through the transition down to the prostate, that it's a gaining process. So it's being added to the entire way down. And then in the prostate or November or the Scorpio, you decide whether you're going to sting the poison out, whether you're going to sacrifice the lives, or you're going to turn into the eagle and all that. And then and then you save that fluid, and then it begins the transition back up, where on the transition back up, it's a winnowing. It's a taking away until it gets back down to that perfect seed, only it's a multiplication because it's went through this entire process. But anyways, November is when you would make that, symbolically make that choice to save the seed, to bring it back up and become the higher man, rather than spill the seed and make the more mundane choice.
We're also getting closer to Lent. Are we already in Lent? The idea of 40 days of giving something up. And there's that movie 40 Days where that heartthrob he tries to give up sex for 40 days. And that's such a difficult thing to do for a lot of young men.
Yeah, especially men prowling Tinder and Bumble.
Young men?
Yes. Now, we have this idea of Lent and sacrifice, and saving
men.
your nut. Yeah, exactly. And Baldy, I want to ask you about the nut, because I'm thinking of this figure, the squirrel in the world tree. Starts with an R, right? How do you pronounce his actual name? It's
Ratatoskr.
Ratatoskr. Could I speculate that he is the one carrying the sacred nut up and down this world tree to deliver messages from the earthly realm to the divine realms? Is this a stretch? What do you think?
That's insightful.
Yeah, he's keeping the two things polarized. So he's a dickhead squirrel. So everybody that's imagining that. The power of life comes from the polarization between the two things, having that really hard thump and that really hard pump. It's you want to have both actions, and they both need to be equal. And so to keep the two sides of this realm polarized, Ratatoskr runs up and down the tree and talks mad shit to each side and keeps them pissed off at each other. He's a good dude.
That's a great name. I love Ratatoskr. That's such a good name.
In that way, he reminds me of Hermes traveling back and forth. So it's again
messenger
element of union.
Definitely. And something else with this idea of Lent. I'm glad you brought that up, Alan, because sacrifice seems to be in the age of Jordan Peterson and all of the influences that he's put upon the quote unquote manosphere. He talks a lot. You gotta have a sacrifice, man. You gotta keep order here. And with Lent, I mean, it makes me think about other practices like it could be fasting. It could be like that polar plunge that you had mentioned earlier, Alan. You are willingly putting yourself through challenge and difficulty, and earning that sweat equity does something to a man. And my question for all of you, maybe in a Saturnian way, and this archetypal coming of age story that we all go through, what does initiation mean to a man, from a boy to a man who's being torn away from that safe maternal womb and is now being put through those trials? What does that look like to you guys? What do you think in this modern day? How do we initiate boys into men?
Boy,
you let them make their own mistake.
That one's such a big. You can go ahead, John.
Oh, that was just my only point. To me, you let a man get initiated by letting them make their own mistakes so they could figure out how the world is. My mother let me do that. I was very lucky to not be told no about everything. You can't do that because this, she just say, go ahead, go see what it's like. Cool.
That's the personal responsibility. And all initiation is self-initiation, which requires courage and bravery to not be afraid of things. And
Yeah.
if you're suffering from social anxiety and you have mental health awareness on all your dating profiles so you can match up with the other women type of a thing, this is the culture we live in, with this avoidant personality disorders and believing in the DSM-V to diagnose you. This is sort of all of the things that you can use as excuses to say, my genetics are terrible, my skin is terrible, the food quality is terrible, I'm poor, I'm never going to achieve anything, it's not even worth trying. Getting a job is wage slavery, so I'm never going to work because that I just, you get these kids, they graduate high school and then they're like, I graduated high school, that was so hard, I want to take the next 4 to 40 years off and just party and go to Europe and travel the world and do all these things before I get a real education and marry and settle down. And it's like, again, there's no timeline for any one person. Everyone is going to be different, and different challenges will arrive in your life as you're ready for them to tackle them. And that's sort of the faith that you have in yourself to accomplish these things. So don't be concerned or worried about fictional ideas in your mind and these neurotic tendencies to get with other people and sort of just say like, all these things could go wrong, we might as well just stay home. Well, that's self-quarantine, that's imprisoning yourself. That's not a courageous thing. I think what we're getting at is the idea of the hero's journey, and that is the journey towards a divine masculine acceptance of what you need to do.
So it's super hard in today's society to find a real way to do this. But in your tribal society, the transition into man, your manhood test was a huge deal. And it did a number of things to a person. And a boy was kicked out of the village and you were gone.
Yeah.
You had to go live off in the forest and learn how to make it on your own. And in that time frame, you learned a number of things. You learned how to be self-sufficient and how to take care of yourself. You learned what you were worth, what you're good at and what you're not. And you learned that you can make it as a man. And when you went back to the village, not only were you not ever a net negative at that point in time, you were always going to be a productive person, because at the very least you could take care of yourself. You also, if the village didn't suit what you wanted, you came to your manhood by yourself. And so you had certain standards that you came to understand that this is how I should live. And if that didn't fit this village, you were perfectly free to go live back in the fucking woods. And you could. I'll go back. I'll go live wherever I want. I don't have to deal with this because I don't want to do this. So if you were going to stay in the village or in that area, you were going to share the same values as those people, and you were going to be a productive person. Now, in today's society, there isn't really that ritual of going out into manhood where you're just cut off from all other resources and hung out to dry like the kid pushed into the pool. Swim or don't swim. And that's a really hard thing. I do have, at my place, we regularly have visitors, and this mountain, it's something else. And we have guys that'll go out and they will camp out on the property, and they will we're friends with some of them. These guys, they before I was friends with these guys, they were friends with some of them, like Snake Jones, and they find out what they're worth, and they find out how good their big ideas are and how manly they think they are. And some guys, they get here, and when they got here, they thought chopping up a pile of wood was man's work, and then I'd laugh at them and tell them that's for little kids, and then we'd go do man stuff. Because anybody can chop up wood. We all need to stay warm. That we have to go do a lot more than that if you're going to be up to the snuff here. And they get that test, and when they go home, they it changes them, all of them. And but that's a hard thing, because in our society, you're told you need to be paid for everything you do, and you're not getting paid to take the man test. You're just not. And you know, it's that rite of passage, and until you pass it, you just don't get it. You don't.
Yeah, well said, my friend. Well said. And you know, maybe we can think about what you just brought up, Ben, is the fact that some people need a strong mentor to show them the way, because I see this every day. I'm working in a public school, and boys come in and they're told what to do all day, and none of it is man's work, right? It's not really pushing them towards this initiation that maybe they're subconsciously seeking, because they're in this very effeminized environment every day for 8 hours, and then they get out, and that's when they really live. And you know, I'm curious if we can go around. How did you recognize a role model or some kind of mentor that shaped you? And you know, what did you really learn from them, and how could you maybe replicate and you know, emulate them in your own life? I'm curious what you guys would say to that. Who wants to start?
I'll take it. So I've been a martial artist my whole life. I was 22 years old, and I decided I needed to find a master, somebody who was clearly my superior in the martial realm. And I moved out to Boulder, Colorado, and started seeking out a capoeira instructor. And it took me quite a few misses. I found a few, and I just kind of climbed the ladder. And eventually, the master that I found, Larry Stevenson, Careca, old Baldy, he went by the name Baldy. That was his nickname. And I realized that it wasn't his machismo, his physical strength. He was he was gangly, he was long, he was stringy, but he was sophisticated, and he was wise, and he could speak. He spoke Spanish his whole life. He was raised in Puerto Rico, but he also spoke perfect Portuguese, and he spoke a lot of Swahili. He knew African songs by heart. Then that motherfucker could dance. He could salsa. He had all these attributes that I didn't even know were worthy of admiration, but he could do them in his sleep. And that was the master that I discovered, and I still honor and respect him in a great way. But the thing that was so powerful was how hard it was to impress him. And that was something that I learned as a role model. You know, it doesn't do anybody any service to lavish them with compliments or to over approve of them. And in fact, that's coddling. And a truly good master holds a high standard, even in your most shining and proudest moment for yourself. They'll look down their nose at you and be like, nah, I don't think so, bro. I don't think so. And they will drag you through the fucking mud for years and years and years. And they will be very sparse and sparing with their praise. And that was a fucking hard ass lesson for me to go 5, 6, 7 years with this fucker, and him hardly ever to be like, not bad, you know. And in our art form, it's all very nonverbal. And in fact, like to think that he would say anything is way too much to expect, but it's just the facial expression of praise. And very seldom did I ever get the, you don't suck that much. And that was the most I could expect out of him. And that's the kind of mentality that a real good mentor will carry forward. So I'll just kind of drop that gem for everybody.
Right on, right on. Mr. McGee, would you like to share your mentor story?
I don't really have a mentor story, honestly. I have male figures that I look up to. But Enoch's description and his example just now, it reminds me of the master that's on the Kill Bill Volume 2 that trains the main character. He never gives her any type of like smile or anything, man. He even says, "Hey, if you eat off the ground, you don't eat at all." It's crazy. I
Yeah,
would
it's
say
funny
that
seeing. Oh, go ahead, man. Sorry.
no, no, you're good, brother. Go ahead.
I was just gonna bring up Doctor Strange because he approaches the temple and he wants to get in, he wants to train, and he's denied over and over again. He's got to wait and learn patience, I guess, and or demonstrate persistence before he's entered or before he's given entrance. Yeah. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Right. With me, and what my role models have taught me is that, and what's really seems pretty masculine, because I don't see a lot of like females do this type of. They don't carry themselves the same way as when they fail, they keep going. I see more like it's more feminine to just give up and just quit. You know what I mean? But the men in my life have showed me that you just keep going, no matter what. You just keep going, and I would say that that's the most that any man could show you, honestly. To not give up, keep going for what you want.
Amen, brother. Amen. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Perseverance. When you know, you guys all know I've told this many times that I was at Sandy Hook my senior year, and my principal would always give us a really interesting message every day after that. He would announce this, he would send this in emails, he would say, our collective strength and resilience will serve as an example for the rest of the world. And that's always stuck with me. Despite all the other baggage of this event, it was that message of resilience and just keep on going because there's something else worth fighting for at the end. It's like there's still some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. We gotta keep going, you know.
You have to keep knocking
We gotta keep
for the door to
knocking.
be opened.
Couldn't have said it better. Yes.
Hey, you said you went to Sandy Hook.
Yes, sir. Well, no, okay. So the
Really?
Sandy Hook is one of many elementary schools in the Newtown area.
Okay.
But I've been there. And you know, I won't get into it, but I've been there many times.
Of course not.
Yeah, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. For actually for wrestling, and I'll
That's
just quickly
interesting.
say this now because we brought it up. Sandy Hook. I've trained wrestlers there, and my mentor is actually my wrestling coach back in high school. His nickname was Dano, Daniel. He's a little short Filipino man. He was probably it's like I'm like 5'6". He was probably like 5'4", maybe 5'5". Like he was pretty I don't want to say petite, but you know, he was tiny but feisty, and they would call him the Filipino Flash
Yeah.
because he had speed above all else, explosive speed, and he never let his side like he was like not the archetypal Napoleon who was angry at everybody. Like that's kind of like the Napoleon complex that society has created, but he was just someone who owned it completely. And him and the other coaches would say this: your mind goes, or sorry, wherever your mind goes, your body follows. So he would always train us to have that killer instinct when we go out there for those that quick 6 minute wrestling match, because if you don't bring that out there, if your instincts aren't tuned in, then you're going to be flat on your back in no time. So that was always a powerful message. You know, I'm not a killer, but I go into everything knowing that I still have the capability of succeeding, even if the other guy is way bigger than me, or if the mountain's really
Yep.
tall, the challenge is really high. So I would share that. Joshua, what do you think about mentors? It's funny that you brought this up in the chat here, and I'm glad that you did, because I wasn't thinking about that earlier. But what do you think about mentors?
Well, growing up, I really didn't have good ones until a certain age. It wasn't until I started going to like Boy Scout camp and having like a scoutmaster who was teaching me manly type things like tying knots and building shelters in the forest, survivalism type skills. And then I was going to like summer camps and learning but leadership camps and like politically themed camps and stuff like that. And although it wasn't as male-esque, I was learning like public speaking and stuff like that. So it was more like the artistic male side of, like back in the Greek and Roman times, the orators and stuff. It kind of reminded me of that. So it wasn't until like those times that I really had role models, so to speak. And I think that that's something that can be both under and overestimated. Just having one in your life, I don't think is enough. It has to be one that's engaged and actually wants to raise you, and see you succeed. Because and like a father, for instance, you can procreate, have a child, and feed it and shelter it and take care of it in a way, but then still not provide it the raising element. And I think that if that's not provided, it's like a plant kind of growing without any kind of structure. If it's lucky enough to become resilient and survive on its own, great. But but I think it's maybe even a little cultural too, like what we look up to and what we want to embody. And even for me growing up, I actually looked up to Joan of Arc. It wasn't even a male, and it was because she actually pretended she was a male and led the French troops under God, and took over a bunch of land and stuff. So I always looked up to her because I didn't have a good male role model, but what she had was faith. So even though she wasn't like huge and strong and everything, she's in my eyes, like being strong of faith was masculine, like divine masculine. Of course, with her being of the opposite gender, that's even more so divine masculine, I guess. But I just think that that's something that we don't realize, that as we get older, though, we can become, or we might be somebody's role model and not even know it. And so I think that it's important to talk about that, because maybe recognizing that we didn't have one helped me realize, oh, I can be that one for my nephews, for instance, or whomever that might be in the community. And or even just younger males. Like I got friends that are like 26, and their idea of fun's going to the strip club and drinking beer and stuff. And I just think it's funny because I'm so much older than them, and I never really was into that anyway. But just seeing them do it, it's like, well, when I can, I try to offer them good advice. I'm like, listen, you don't want to be doing this in 5-10 years. You might want to find a good girl and work on yourself right now instead of wasting time. So it's kind of interesting to see that our society is really kind of wayward, because with each passing generation, those role models are less and less effective. And I think that's why it's so important to, I was hoping maybe Ben could comment on this by talking about like the Havamal, or anybody else that maybe has historical literature or like the Bible. I think these things are very important. And usually, no matter what culture it's in, like whatever the predominant religion is, that's kind of associated with conservatism. And I've always thought that was kind of interesting, because it's like that provides in the absence of a father, quote unquote, we look to God the Father, whatever that might be, in each respective culture, And I think what's kind of happened here in our country is that the nanny state has been raising everybody, and everybody kind of looks up to the government, and now it's your parent. And God help us if, you know, that gets to be the majority.
100%.
Now we have a crisis on our hands. And so that's kind of how I feel about it. And that's why I wanted to bring that question up, because I really didn't have a good one. And I just, growing up, you know, at age 37 now, looking back, I think like, man, I could have made a lot less mistakes. I could have maybe learned new skill sets. Like, I think just the impact, I don't think we realize like what impact we can have on a developing mind or minds. Cause like you work at a school, you said, so, I mean, you have the potential, like all those kids you helped with wrestling, for instance, you could be, even if they don't make the conscious recognition of it, you might actually be like the default role model because they don't have a better one to look up to, you know. And I think that's really powerful. So that's just there's thoughts I wanted to share there on that.
Yeah, I quickly want to comment, and then I want to hear Baldy, because what's it called again? It starts with an H. I just want to make sure I say it properly.
Oh, Havamal.
Havamal, yeah. I definitely want to dive into that, and because he brought up beer too. We're gonna talk about beer for sure. We certainly are, but you know, it seems like there's this pattern of people who, you know, I can kind of see this tracked throughout my own friends who are now starting to have kids. You know, I'm turning 28 in April. We're at this ripe age where it's like time to start a family and get our roots going. And I see a lot of men who did not grow up with strong father figures who are now becoming those figures themselves, and they this maybe deficit has driven them to seek out and to become what they had been missing. And I think that's kind of fascinating, given that it could be very damaging, and we can see this damage throughout our entire culture. And yet there are still men out there responding like, nope, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to be better than the last generation and X, Y, and Z. And so that's pretty cool. And glad you brought that up. So, Baldy, what do you think, man? This has been fun so far.
So, yeah, you bet. I think that when you're young, it wasn't supposed to be really a role model situation. And I didn't have one at that age. In general, most men, and I'm from a very, rural area. And so the men that I looked up to and respected were all men that, like, if there was a problem, all of a sudden 6 guys show up and they're all ready to do something. They all got tools and they're putting plans in action and they're taking care of things, and nobody's putting their hand out wanting paid. I live out in the mountains now, and just yesterday we had the most crazy blizzard here. And the trees here are not prepared for that. So we had trees going down like mad, and somebody was driving and a tree fell right across their vehicle. And then out in the middle of a mountain road, all of a sudden, like 6 dudes with chainsaws show up with different vehicles. Like, nobody should have been driving on the road where these guys showed up. They're all like, okay, we're gonna, like, here, how are we gonna, and they're just, they're just fixing the situation. And that's what dudes did. And so there was just a general sense that if you wanted to be a man, that's how you acted. You did man stuff. You acted like a man. And then when you got older, that's, I think, when more of the role model situation came up, where now that I've become just a man in general, now I kind of want to specialize in this thing. Hey, I found that I'm pretty good at working metal. I'm going to go hang out with this blacksmith and that I admire, and I think he's a good blacksmith, and I want to start producing things like him. And I think it's at that point that, after you just had this general manhood, that you would then progress on to actually having some type of a role model, because it's like you've reached this 0 point. Like, now it's time for me to do this. And I never had a role model in that scenario. Honestly, I had just a series of every time I got to the next level, I would think I met somebody that was gonna be that person, and it was always Wizard of Oz, always, including when I had my TV show, and I met all these heads of these different pagan societies and things like that, and the head of an alchemy society, and I'm like, you people don't know half of what I know. You could never be my role model. Like, I wouldn't even hang out with you. You're just pompous asses. And it's so I never actually got to experience that myself, but I also feel like society's fallen to such low extremes that it's that whole warriors and thinkers quote. I'm not real big on the Greeks. I think it was a very feminized society, but but that quote I do really enjoy, where your warriors and your thinkers are supposed to be the same people. And that's where I really had a disconnect, because in my area, if you were a man, you went out and did manly things, and then you went and drank beer and watched football and things like that. And I was down with doing the manly things. Like, I'm down with going out and working on the car, working on the truck, firing up the steel, going and doing some carpentry, whatever. But then I'm not going to go do mindless watch TNA movies, which is tits and ass for any of you younger guys. Like, that was the big thing. Oh, TNA movies, and I'm not going to do any of that nonsense. And I honestly feel like that's something that was pushed on men. Like, when I was young, I was taught that men thought about sex like every 3 seconds. And even as a child, when I heard that, I was like, what? How the fuck could you can't even think anything else then? Like, you couldn't have another, so it's like they've pushed men into the manly men is just me, I pick things up and put them down. And then the sissy man is the man that reads and has high intellectual thoughts. And so in the area I lived, that's the way it was. And I don't feel like that at all. When I'm not doing what people would call man work, and I do a lot of it, more than most men by far, I go and do scientific experiments. I could literally fill libraries with the books I've read. I do all kinds of different things like that. I do crafts. I make jewelry. So I mean, different art things. I'm not real good at art, but I don't really show anybody because I suck at it. But that's okay. I do my own things, my own little dumb things, and that's what men are supposed to do. You're not. It's bring back the study, in my opinion, not bring on the man cave where you can sit there and play video games and act like an asshole. Like, you're supposed to have a higher mind, and then as that higher mind develops, you put that more into your daily life, and life just gets better and better. In the Havamal, when I came across the Havamal, that, like, I didn't come to the northern European culture until I was much older. I went fully left-hand path, and I went took the full circuitous route to come to where I landed. And when I finally read the Havamal, it was like, did I write this damn thing? What is going? And it's literally just a book of how you should be as a man. And that's something we haven't really touched on. And I thought we should do that right out the gate. Like, because there's just confusion about what a man is entirely. And the thing is in the way alchemy works, the man is the salt. You are the stability. You are the home. And that home needs, I loved where Alan Marcus went with this. You need to become a man before you expect a woman worth a shit to come in your life and fill it. So the man is the salt, the stability, and the woman is the thing that frees that trapped soul, so it's more mobile and it fills it with love. So you need to, as a man, be the provider, the protector. I spend countless nights sleepless because there's predators around or something, or I'm worried that the baby goat might be getting cold, or whatever's going on. my number one purpose in life on this farm is caretaker. Everything on this farm needs to live a good life. And if it does not, that's my fucking fault. That's on me every single day. If something dies, that's on me. And that is what I provide. And then my wife fills it with love and beauty. But being a man is being capable, being the protector, being the provider, being the hard line. Like when something comes, I am the end of the fucking line at the end of the day. And I do not bend.
Yeah, but yeah, man, it's that term husbandry plays a huge role there because you're the steward of this area that you're watching over and the people that are living there, and it's on your shoulders, and it's a beautiful burden to be bearing. I really love that you've brought that up, and that even though it's costing you sleep sometimes, it's the most important job you'll ever have, and it's beautiful. I'll just say that. And Mr. Alan Marcus, what do you think? We've woven through a lot of different topics, and I still want to get to beer and soy, of course, but when it comes
Sure.
to the initiatory apprenticeship that we us gentlemen go through, there's a lot of different paths. And what kind of path do you find to be the most ideal, and what have you learned about mentorship along your
Well,
own journey?
with mentorship, I think that's another aspect of the hero's journey. There's maybe a type of boy who is searching constantly for a mentor and thinking that a mentor needs to be a perfect ideal figure, and then they'll go through and kind of like, well, there's this flaw about this person, and they're looking for a perfect mentor, and then they don't find that perfect mentor, so then they just keep searching for a mentor and they don't advance anywhere. And that's okay. I think recognizing that men are they're dimensional. They have aspects to them. They have low points and they have emotions, and they'll hide them and they'll put them aside at times. But that doesn't mean that a man is going to be perfect in every decision. There are so many storms and so many shit tests from culture and women and people around them to test them, because they know that they are emitting that masculine energy. So when you're emitting the masculine energy and you're attracting that opposition, keep going, don't give up. So the mentors my father taught me, you got to be persistent. If you make a commitment to something, even if halfway through you turn out to not like the thing, you committed to it, you have to finish it. And then there's a lesson at the end. And then you can sign up for a different sport or a different hobby. It's like if you get a pet, a little puppy, a little kitten, and you're like, well, I guess I don't like it. You have the responsibility now because you took that on. So then the father figure will say, well, we warned you. We said, that's a stray animal. Don't bring it into the house. But now that you've taken it on as a responsibility, that's your responsibility. So you have to take personal responsibility and also be responsible for that animal that you've taken on because you watched Lassie or you watched something, which leads to the next point of role models on television and movies and watching sitcoms and thinking like a sitcom father. And then that gets into like the animated comedies of The Simpsons and Peter Griffin and Family Guy and these sorts of things, and realizing that these scripted narratives are not reality. And that's a hard lesson to learn. And then the other note I made here is in a school setting, you might say it's kind of a feminized setting, and now in 2023, it's maybe not even a feminized setting. It's an agender setting, meaning without gender. So they're pulling the feminine towards the center. They're pulling the masculine towards this middle where they're not even giving masculine qualities. They want unisex bathrooms and they want equality for everybody. So you can be a worker and you can wear the same pantsuit and you can go to work in that uniform. So it's not divine masculine, it's not divine feminine, it's moving towards a transhumanist thing. which is then realizing over time that a lot of things that your most trusted mentors and teachers and religious leaders and these people, they only know what they were taught. So a lot of them are repeating what they were told without having the firsthand experience. So then that's where the challenge of recognizing that you don't have a set of directions. Your mentors they don't have the skills that you thought they had because they were faking it until they made it into a position to do the thing that they were not qualified to do. So then you'll realize that you learn by doing it and by necessity. So don't be afraid to step into a position that you think you're not qualified for. If you're offered the position, then take it and learn from it. So that's the other thing, is putting yourself in a position to have opportunities presented to you to take them instead of waiting for a mentorship or like asking, can I be your apprentice? Sort of a thing. Dr. Strange showing up at a temple. That's sort of like a religious thing, which brings into this idea of the masculine as kind of a monk or a hermit or a man going his own way, sort of leaving the culture to go on a study for a time. That may be necessary for some people. But for other people, that may be seen as a luxury because their primary concern is, well, I don't have a roof over my head, so I need to go and become a wage slave. And this is sort of a cultural thing now where a lot of men are saying, they're not paying me enough for what I'm worth, and I'm undervalued. And this sort of concern of, does the divine masculine need to receive compliments and compensation for the work that he does? Does he have a lack mentality? Does he fear that he's not going to have enough? So then he doesn't tip a waitress. He withholds his finances and he becomes sort of this miser type person. That's a question for you.
Well, interesting point. Just on the school comment, I can't help but bring this up because I think you're absolutely right. There is no mentor that's just going to show up. And when I was first put into the teacher training program, our very, very first assignment was to watch a film called Waiting for Superman. And the whole premise of this movie, which exposes a lot of the dark practices of the education system, is the fact that Superman ain't coming, y'all. Like, he is not going to show up. You have to become Superman. And that's the most valuable lesson that I've gotten out of this teaching program, is all the techniques and all the jargon and politics aside, like, it's the fact that you have to become Superman because he's not going to show up, and you can seek someone out who might embody the ideal Superman, but more importantly, you have to become him yourself. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yes. What do you guys think? Should we talk about beer? Because
Well, that's the question.
yes.
Beer money, and who's going to pay the tab?
Yes.
You're going to buy rounds for the entire bar here?
Cheers. Cheers.
Well, I like
I
that
don't-
miserly part too, because like I said, I like where you went with that miserly, because those guys that just appeared out of fucking nowhere with chainsaws, like, dude, where did you even come from with your fucking 660 steel chainsaw already warmed up and running? Like, you just magically appeared because there was need. That dude wasn't asking for money afterwards. You might, like me, when I went up, when the tree fell across the road and they were having problems, I went up and nobody else had done it. So I went up there and took my saw and cleaned it up. And yeah, I took the wood I cut up. I didn't like ask anybody for money or anything like that. Men do the right thing straight out. And that whole miserly idea, that really takes the heart right out of men. It really does.
I think that kind of gets to the like to be needed. Like those men with the tools, for instance, that were in the right place at the right time. Like that's like what they've been waiting for almost all their life, right? It's just the opportunity to
exactly
use the tool that they got. And so
this dude was hiding in a corner with this steel for like 5 years and just like, ha!
So like the Boy Scout motto of like, be prepared,
exactly,
be ready.
that's what they taught us. Yeah. And
You
I think that
bet.
there's something to that because, you know, in a way, it's like men kind of become a Swiss Army knife. It's like, well, I got a tool for that. I got a screwdriver or whatever, you know, and it's like them to be needed, then they fill this role that then none one else in the family occupies, you know. And I think it's interesting too, because it's kind of like how the mother will normally occupy the kitchen or doctor wounds and things like that. And I just think it's interesting how males and females kind of gravitate toward different professions based on what their inherent skill sets tend to be. And no matter how much we try to change that, it seems to be there. And I think that it's also interesting, though, from the perspective of the divine masculine and feminine, that when you borrow from that other side, it's not meant to replace, but borrowing from it does add like a extra aspect or characteristic. So for instance, like when we have a deity like God the Father, for instance, all powerful, warlike, etc., but can also then be caring, because with that without that strength you can't protect your people, so to speak, right? Whereas like if a god, quote unquote, was not strong, then he can't even be caring, because being caring would just, you just end up dead, right? So I think it's interesting too when those are borrowed from one another, like a woman that can fix something is probably a little bit attractive just because they're somewhat capable, not totally helpless, right? But then at the same time, it's like when a man maybe um, cooked something for his wife, she might find that attractive even though it's not his role. So I think it's kind of interesting sometimes where we can create a flow of energy by borrowing those things from the other side. But I think it's so important to recognize that those boundaries actually do exist inherently, so that when we do steal from that other side, it creates like an imbalance and a flow. And I think that's kind of at the core of why people do that sort of thing on purpose, is because they're trying to channel that. But I might have gotten off topic. I'm sorry. I kind of forgot what we started.
Oh, that's
No,
all right. Yeah.
that's perfect. I mean, that's the metaphor of sportsmanship. I think a lot of mentoring happens through athletics, and not necessarily physical athletics. It could be mental athletics. It could be quiz teams, debate teams, these sorts of things. These competitions for the sake of learning to be competitive, but also being a good sport and not being a sore loser. And knowing
Yeah.
that you have to achieve your personal best, which might not be great at all in the competition. You might be the worst out of everybody, but that's the masculine thing, to not compare yourself to another athlete, to another artist, to another competitor as an excuse for you to not do the thing.
That's a
Yeah,
good
the
point.
value of any trophy is not in the fact that everyone gets one, but it's like if you can push yourself, and I like how you frame that, Alan, to not compare yourself to others, but compare yourself to who you were yesterday. That's literally a quote from Jordan Peterson. It makes me tingle to say that. Like my lobster senses are tingling right now. But it's funny because the main, like, I'm imagining the main attack on modern masculinity is, it really does stem from that participation trophy ethic, which I think goes into this asexualized, like non-gendered roles that are pushed in school, and that there cannot be winners or losers. Everyone must be, it's like Harrison Bergeron, right? Like enforced equality. And that's a very dangerous and slippery slope for sure. What do you guys think?
When I was in the army, we immediately noticed that. I was actually in the army. So I went through boot camp. It was still separated, but they integrated it when I was in AIT. AIT is like your more technical training. So in AIT, rather than boot camp, in boot camp, it was balls to the wall. Like that drill sergeant, we were getting smoked all day, every day. They're like, Oh, you got to break, the fuck you do? You got to break to do some push-ups. You know, like when you got out of boot camp, you could do push-ups like while you were sleeping. You're like, it didn't even bother you anymore. And when we were in AIT, everything has to be catered down because, like, say you're on a unit run. Well, if you've got a quarter of the unit lagging behind, that's obviously not the military mindset. And so immediately putting women in really knocked down the quality of men that were being produced, because it had to, just like Harrison Bergeron, they had to make it more equal in order to make this work as a unit. And in order to make it work as a unit, because they let in such weak links. And I understand that that sounds horrible, but it's not, women should not be in that position. That was the problem. Not that women themselves are weak, because my home would not be what it is without Christy. And the only reason I'm able to go out and be who I am is because of her. And I'm very aware of that. But if she was standing next to me, I couldn't be me. I would have to be worried about her. I would have to be worried about my home, all those other things. So there's a reason that that was done like it was. And when we decided that it needs to be pushed together, it immediately was harmful to everybody all around. And on the hops, so with the soy thing, everybody goes on about how it's the soy, that's, these are all soy boys, but it's been pushed on it's been pushed on our society that men drink beer. So in 1999, a potent cytoestrogen called 8-prenylene was discovered in hops. In fact, the most potent cytoestrogen found to date, 50 times more potent than the genistein in soy. An obvious explanation for the mental disturbance in female hops workers in the past. Also, an obvious explanation for all the man tits on the beer drinkers. So while you were sitting around talking shit about soy boys, you're chugging something 50 times more potent in cytoestrogen than they are.
Not everyone gets a trophy in Beer Fest, but everyone gets a beer gut. That's for sure. It's the dad bod is available to anyone who will seek it out. And that's kind of funny that Peter Griffin and Homer Simpson, they're clearly overweight and they're embodying the classic American dad ethic. In fact, American Dad is the only one who is actually
not,
built.
It's not classic though.
Yeah, right.
Like that's only something that's been in the last so many years. Classic was Captain America, was competence, goodness, stood for his home and his people, and he was capable, competent, and you didn't fuck with that guy, and he was sexy. Like, that was classic. Peter Griffin is new. Peter Griffin, Al Bundy, all these just incompetent shits that are just worthless, and everybody thinks they're great. That is not classic. That's new and garbage.
Right, and to sit down with a TV dinner tray with the family to watch television together is a very passive activity. And passivity, that's a feminine quality. It's like, eat your dinner together, no television, no cell phones, no music, no distractions, make eye contact, talk with your family members, and then get back to work, right? Don't sit around and watch television and then fall asleep on the couch. I mean, if you're living that comfy life, someone's doing some work for you. Is it your wife? Is it your children? Are you putting too many chores and the burdens of others as a man? Where have your responsibilities gone?
Yeah, like leading isn't just being the head of the household and bossing people around. It's like delegating authority, giving, because he has the authority, he chooses when to delegate it. I know I can't be where I need to be or do what I need to do right now, so I delegate this authority to your older brother or your older sister or I think that's something that's kind of an interesting point to make too, because that's part of the husbandry is also like extended into the family life. You got like sheepdogs and stuff too. You like round up your little brother and your sister.
Yeah,
Well,
I
we've been.
start. I
Go ahead.
started. I stopped that phrase. Practice makes perfect. I stomped that shit out a while back. My kiddo hears practice makes you ready for more practice.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Never enough. Never enough. And speaking of practice, if a young prince will become a king one day, he's going to need a lot of practice. He's got to train and prepare for that. And we have a really famous archetypal, I don't know what to call it. It's a short little book and it's wonderful. It's king, warrior, lover, magician. And the order of that, I'm not sure what comes first, the king, the warrior, the lover, and then the magician is at the end. Maybe there's no definite chronology, but I'm curious. We could talk about the king and having responsibility over his kingdom can easily become a tyrant when too much responsibility, as someone has just recently said, is given to others, and the king is not doing his fair share. So I'm curious with the archetypes. Of course, the tarot weaves can probably come into here as well. We have the king, the warrior who has to defend this kingdom, right? Like when shit hits the fan, the warrior's got to step up and defend it. And the magician is that creative generative principle that, if any man is depressed, they just need to create something. They got to make something. It doesn't matter what it is. You just got to produce something, and that'll definitely make you feel better. And then the lover, well, I think we'll eventually get into the fact that it's been said that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And I'd love to talk about all the above. So I'm just going to throw it out there and see, what do you guys think? There's a lot there, especially with the archetypes. Where should we start?
I will wait my turn and let everybody else speak, but the men are from Mars, women are from Venus. That's definitely that one's my jazz.
Yeah, I dig that. Yeah. One thing I love to point out is, Mars has all those, it's taken all the hits. Mars he's scarred. He's recognized for his scar, we're talking about Deadpool, right? Deadpool, his face is all fucked up. He is Mars. And guess what his love interest? Guess what her name is? Vanessa. It is so true. It is, and she's gorgeous. She's fucking hot. She's cooking. And sure enough, they tell us Venus is pretty fucking hot. But yeah, I love that. And furthermore, Mars, per the consensus cosmology, Mars is on the exterior. Mars is in the public. Mars is taking the hits. Mars is out there in the protective role. And Venus is where it's nice and warm and safe and beautiful and perfect, where she can, be admired and preserved. So yeah, I think it's quite profound that per the standard cosmology, it is also recognizes that seventh hermetic principle, gender.
I could comment a little bit on these archetypes. I think a lot of times they kind of characterize children as being like little kings, like throwing temper tantrums, and so like the archetype of giving in to the child's every whim, creating a little tyrant. I can kind of almost see that as like the child. And of course in tarot, that would be like the happiness card where the child's sitting on the horse, he's the king or whatever. So it could be like a very young type archetype. Like you said, the prince, that kind of motif kind of comes to mind with the king thing. It's just an immature version of what he might be later on, or it's that potential at least. And I think with the warrior, that's you get warrior age men. I mean, there's even a cutoff in the military. I couldn't join if I wanted to. I'm already too old apparently, and I think that's kind of interesting because pretty much at 18, you can no more than drink a beer and then go die for your country, you know? And so like the warrior is kind of in this where the male's at his peak physicality, and mental acuity. He's at, you know, his best in a lot of different ways. So I think the warrior kind of represents that young adult stag kind of thing. He may not even have a family yet, right? But then you got the lover. By contrast, let's say he has a wife, you know, now he's got something to fight for, or maybe a reason not to go to war, etc. So those elements can be there with the lover, and then of course creating progeny. And then with the magician, I think that's kind of like a mastery of resources. You know, with that, we would normally see the sword, the pentacle, the chalice, and the wand, of course. And so that to me represent a male that's balanced aspects of himself and his life, perhaps after having been the warrior, perhaps may or may not have found a lover, but then fell in love with knowledge or wisdom or something. Like I almost see like the magician as a Merlin type of archetype, or you know, having a, I think Benjamin maybe mentioned having a study earlier. So it's kind of like that archetype is one that represents the wisdom of the male, I think. And then, you know, so maybe they could be in terms of age, but I think we kind of develop parts of them at different stages in our life. And maybe if we don't hit certain milestones or have certain rites of passage, you know, we can leave like elements of that out. And so I think that if we were to educate ourselves on those, we could discover like, oh, you know, I'm inherently fulfilling a lot of these, but you know, this cluster here is maybe not fully fleshed out. So then investing a little bit in that lover archetype could balance out the warrior archetype. And maybe, you know, looking at the magician and king kind of balances like, well, is it a king could be strong, but is he wise? Right. So I think that could kind of add to the balance. And that might be a little bit about what the Five Rings, the book of Five Rings gets at, I think, is balance and mastery of different weapons and stuff like that. It's almost like every weapon had its own personality or something, and philosophy that went along with it. But the other thing I wanted to comment on was the rites of passage, because, you know, we're kind of robbed of that. I think that that's something that should probably be happening to you at various stages in your life, but more especially at like age 13. Like in Egyptian culture, they would never cut a certain lock of hair over your eye until you were 13. And then at that age, they would sever that child lock. And then from that point on, you were expected to be an adult and no longer see through children's eyes, but through adult eyes. And, you know, maybe held to a higher standard of accountability. And, you know, maybe if you did get in trouble, quote unquote, and you had your child lock, well, you know, get out of here, kid. But you get caught doing something and you don't have your child lock, it's like, well, we're going to teach you a lesson. So, but we're robbed of that. So like the closest we get to those sorts of things now are like learner's permit or driver's license. And then because we don't really, wisdom teeth. Exactly. Getting your wisdom teeth extracted, I think, is such a bizarre rite of passage that most people go through now. For a lot of folks, that's their first encounter with anesthesia, pain meds, things like that, that they would have otherwise never been exposed to. And so in an initiatory kind of way, they're being introduced to pharmakia and things of that nature, but and in, you know, not maybe not a healthy way, right? I remember when I was on stuff like that in the past for procedures like that, you know, it gave you a really weird feeling, and you then your friends maybe want them, and it introduces you to like a whole new area of things like that. You know, it's very unhealthy. But then a positive thing I could maybe say is like, well, look into the scouting again. There was something called the OA, the Order of the Arrow. And this is like a more healthy rite of passage that I really enjoyed. And it was because after you went to scout camp, if you're scout master, kind of like the teacher that doesn't compliment you, right? Well, I had the scoutmaster. He would tell you when you did a good job. But what was really interesting about this ritual was that at the end of scout camp, everybody would line up around a bonfire, and it was dark. And these Indian braves were dressed up, and they would walk around the perimeter of the circle. And your scoutmaster, if he felt that you were deserving, he would stand behind you with a white sash and a red arrow on it. And as the Indian chiefs were walking around, if you were tapped, as they would say, and that sash was above your head, you were marked, the Indian dudes would stop in front of you, hit you on the chest, yell something, I can't remember what it was, and then drag you off into the distance amid all this, the orange glow of the fire. And at that age, it was a little bit terrifying, right? So, I think having that element of fear there and uncertainty, knowing that you're probably going to be okay, but at the same time, it's like, well, what's going on? There's this anticipation and stuff. And what I really liked about that was that you return after that. You return for a week and work on the property, cleaning up after camp, doing projects, learning the importance of teamwork and things of that nature. And while you were there, you weren't allowed to talk. So you had to perform your labor in complete silence, and you had to take a vow of silence. And, that was for me a very interesting experience, because how often are you forced, to do things like that? And so toward the end, you also didn't eat. And so then at the end, they then blindfolded you, and you had to hold a rope, and then there was somebody in front of you, and they probably had 100 kids holding on the rope, and walking through the woods at night up to a campfire. And then that you got your blindfolds removed, and there was another ritual, and they gave you like the bear claw and everything. And I know a lot of this just sounds silly perhaps, but at that age, I hadn't encountered any kind of rites of passage or rituals or any. I mean, to me, this is the type of stuff my father should have been doing with me anyway, but here I had to join a proxy group to, get these same types of experiences. And I think that those are very important, because I credit a lot of my upbringing to like scouting, for instance, whereas I've never had those experiences. I felt like it maybe would have left a gap that maybe I would have always been searching for something that to fill that, but by having it filled there in a healthy way, I felt like it really contributed to my development in a positive way. So I just wanted to weave on that rite of passage thing a little bit, because we read about where they take the shaman to be for the tribe, and deep into the cave and dose them up on like mushrooms or something like that, and they'd come out, they're no longer a child. They come out an adult and the shaman or whatever. And so, you don't hear about stuff like that anymore. And so I just think it's important to kind of maybe spend a moment or two talking about how important those things are, and what are some of the rites of passage for a divine masculine. Like, I think having a child is probably a really important one that I've never experienced. And marriage, having sex for the first time is supposed to coincide with marriage for the most part, and having a child. But see, all those things are kind of unlinked now because they're kind of mutually exclusive, But in a traditional way, even like getting married and having a child is supposed to be like an initiation of sorts. So there was a question earlier about, should the man kick out his son at 18 and kick him out of the nest or whatever? Well, I think, yeah, possibly, but in a healthy way, helping him understand, like, well, go find your fortune, go find your wife, then come back. I'll have some property here for you, and you can build a home and stuff like that. But like nowadays, you don't even have that. Like my own father sold our property that was given
Uh,
to him. So I don't even have a birthright now. And so I think that kind of thing is important too, because these all really tie into deeply rooted, like ancestral type things, like cutting our connection to the land really has an effect on the masculine man too. Like I can imagine, like look at maybe how a native tribe would feel, for instance, like when the Indians lost their land and how that affected the men in that tribe, not being able to go out and hunt and stuff like that. So I think slowly over time, we're starting to see the effects on society of taking out the claws, spiritual claws, I guess.
yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to ramble. Thank you.
Oh, I've got a few thoughts about that. Immediately getting to this idea of the metropolitan area where you go on a camping trip, specifically leaving civilization as far as you can. It might be a 20-minute trip to a Kia campground, which is enough for you because there's a few trees and you can set up a tent and you can pretend to kind of camp and kind of rough it a little bit, which is to say there's this idea of that show Sex in the City, and the idea of city being a Babylon place, and that's a sinful area because people are now comfortable, so they can sit around and have recreational sex, which is to say now they're chasing tail and that dopamine hit. So John Mitchell, historian, he writes about this, the idea of the fathers and the founders, the founding fathers of cities, where they will measure the land and they'll mark the four corners of their city to do the city planning. And then they'll put up walls. So you got Babylon, you got Nimrod, all these patriarchal figures in the Bible who are talking about different tribes building their cities, their city states, and building up to now we have governments and federal governments and layers of this politicking, which is quite different from just building a nice little community to settle down in. But now everything seems to be urban sprawl. So you have a metropolitan area, a center of activity, of commerce, of education. And then from there, you've got levels of that urban sprawl where it just goes on and on and on. And then there's nothing. And then it's flyover country until you get to the next city. So when man is building these limitations, these cities expand, these limitations, they become more onerous and neglected, with the result that in the language of the apocalypse, the city becomes Babylon. So the parasitic horror, the horror of Babylon, this is getting into the biblical language, talking about this belief in the element of the Rome. You have Rome being a very powerful civilization, and you have Roman warriors, and then you have these ideas of the expansion around or beyond the original city boundaries. So there's this breach of the foundation contract where Rome was like, we got to conquer everything. We have to control everything. We have to build up this metropolitan area. And then in doing so, you've got the idea of, well, we're going to have this industrial revolution. So men are going to leave their properties, leave their homes, leave their apartment buildings. It became an apartment that they would leave to go work in a factory for another man. And now when men would go into the cities, they would decide, well, okay, the jobs are in the cities, we'll do that. So they went along with the culture. And then they began to not marry women and to begin to have a disposable income. So then in 1994, some guy notices this and begins to write about the rise of the metrosexual, being a man who lives in a metropolitan area who begins to groom himself in such a way. And we're talking Mars and Venus, and Venus being maybe like a beauty product or a razor blade, where women are removing hair. Now men are beginning to be conscious of hair on their bodies and their eyebrows, and are they balding or not? Can they get that filled in? And cosmetic surgeries, and working out at the gym, and becoming very cosmopolitan. And then in 2002, you have David Beckham, some soccer player, who's posing like a model in all these magazines, wearing the least amount of clothing possible. And his reaction is, I don't care who is looking at my pictures and enjoying my physique. I don't care if it's man or woman. He didn't care. He was getting into this aspect of this metrosexuality and becoming a role model for other men, who then become very not understanding why women were looking at them and thinking, ha ha ha, you kind of a joke. I'm ready to settle down, but you're a man concerned about his collections, his Funko Pops, his Beanie Babies, his video games, his cars, all of these material possessions, and yet you don't have a wife, you don't have a home. Now you're just living in the city. And now you've lost your purpose, so then you fall into the nihilism, and then you have all these movies like American Psycho, where the man becomes a serial killer or something to be feared, and women are afraid of this type of figure because this man, he's not into taking care of the land, raising the animals, providing things. So his purpose has been taken away, and that gets back to the idea of the nanny state or the big brother, or it's 2023. I don't want to be a wage slave. Don't want to work at Walmart. Just wait it out a few more months. Universal basic income's on the way. They're going to give me a disability. I have social anxiety. I have all these diagnoses, so I can accept Social Security or universal basic income or food stamps or whatever it is. Well, now are you even more attractive to a woman? Is this a situation you find yourself in? And now you're having all these questions about, well, what is my purpose? And I'm not getting the dopamine fix because I'm not getting matches on the dating apps, and now I'm not providing for anybody. So now I'm just in an existential crisis. But there's that new crisis game. It's the new first-person shooter, the new Call of Duty. I can enact all these simulations through a computer because I'm really good at it. And then the final thought being, well, today a wizard is a pejorative. It's the 40-year-old soy boy man child who builds his own computer, can program it, can put on anime wallpapers and really rice it up and make it real nice, but then that impresses no one. And then that person is just drinking Mountain Dew, energy drinks, and then dopamine levels deplete. And then this person just like, well, I guess there's no hope. I'm going to go to the rope. See you later, world. Bye-bye, crew world. And they give up. And they wonder why.
That's a big problem in Japan, too. They even have like a forest where people go to commit suicide because they don't have a purpose.
And on the other end of that, Japan has popularized forest bathing as maybe a therapeutic solution to this, which maybe is going back to the stewardship principle that, losing touch with this maternal nature and being in this city, which is so devoid of any, like not being able to touch grass and dirt and soil, it really changes the entire ecosystem within you.
The concrete jungle. And
yes,
it's interesting that you will need to leave civilization, get out of there to then end your own life, because in the nanny state, you go to a bridge and you start climbing up, there's cameras everywhere. They're going to pull you down because you are the responsibility
now
to be kept alive.
Yeah,
right?
You're not even allowed to do that.
Right. You don't have the right to take your life in the nanny state.
Out on the farm, the only people that ever take their life are people that lose the farm, and they would rather hang it up. Like, that is more competent than that dude was more competent than 99% of the people in the city. He just refused to go live that fucking life. He's like, no, I'd rather hang it up. Like, I could live in an apartment, have a job, all that crap. Screw that. I'd rather dangle. Like, that's why farmers hang it up. Like, we can't handle that life in the first place.
Free ball and let it dangle. Yep.
Yeah.
And so it reminds me too of the concept of honor. Like in the samurai culture, they would do that if it meant if they had to somehow preserve their honor. Sometimes they would do things like that. And how often do you ever hear about people talk about honor today? It's really kind of lost its fullness.
Well, because they've tried to kill pride too. With the two things are very hand in hand.
Yeah.
The only time men say honor is when they're saying, Your Honor, I wasn't drunk.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Like they've done such a slaughtering of pride and showed the negative side of pride. But the fact is like them guys with the chainsaws. That guy went home proud as a peacock. He just did something competent, useful, helped somebody. He told his wife. He was happy about that all damn night. Probably made his week. That's why they appeared out of nowhere like magic. Like you take that away, now you got nothing. You got no, and with the pride comes the honor. Like I'm the dude that's going to do the right thing because I'm proud, and I'm proud of the way I am. I'm proud of who I am. Like they just turn everybody into dirt balls. It's really horrible. And that MGTOW, that's like the answer to the toxic feminine side. And it's not a good answer. It's not a bad answer. Men need to stop chasing women and need to start making women be women. If you're not going to be, and this is, but and I understand where they're coming from. I went through my hermit phase, and when I transitioned to being with Christy, if Christy wasn't the proper loving mother type, I wouldn't have wanted anything to do with her. I would have said, oh no, my life's awesome. Me and my dog are enjoying the shit out of it. Get the hell out of here. Like we already have our own home, unless it's a loving mother that's going to bring this energy into our home. That's the thing that we want. We don't want nothing else. And then the women, because where these girls have turned into just sluts, that the only thing that they believe that their position is for is just to have sex, and then they throw that around everywhere because it's their whole value. Well, we kind of did that as a society, where men sit around watching porn telling women that this is what we want out of women. And when men started really getting into that, well, women are like, all right, then I'll be a whore. You want a whore? I'll be a whore. And so we need to get back to being what we're supposed to be as men, and not accepting any less out of women than what a proper man deserves. But that whole MGTOW thing's just gay. So
I gotta say, I think everybody should at least try MGTOW for a week. I think there is something redeeming about putting your toe in all of those dark, seedy corners, but don't get drawn in. Don't get drawn in.
Can you explain this? Because I'm not familiar with this.
It's men going their own way. So it's a group of silly nanny men, boys, that have noticed that, and they have a valid point, that in court and things like that, women have all the power in our country. That if a woman decides that she wants to have the baby, she can have the baby. If she wants to kill the baby, she can kill the baby. You have no say. If she decides she wants to keep the baby, she can decide whether you ever get to see that baby or not, and whether you're going to pay for the rest of your life or not. She can decide, and in the recent past, we've seen a huge move in society where women don't take care of their kids. They will find a dude that is actually a decent dude that will take care of a family and go out and work. They'll go ahead and hook up with him, punch out a couple kids, and then move in some dirt bag and have this dirt bag boning her all up in this dude's house until he breaks up with her, and then she just sucks off the whole money off of his child support. And the child support system in this very feminized court system's like, dude don't need nothing. Every penny he makes goes to her. It's insane. So the MGTOW is the answer to that they're just like, well, we're just staying away from women entirely. It's kind of a, but then you find out and I understand, again, like it kind of parallels going as a hermit and refusing to bring somebody into my life until they were the proper person. Right. But it parallels it. It's also not quite right. Like Gabe said, it's a dark corner.
It is a dark corner. There are two really good terms to like kind of wrap your head around. Everybody, or the public focuses a lot on phallogocentrism, and that is that the whole world revolves around the cock. But what MGTOW is bringing to light is gynocentrism. And like I said, like, you don't want to get in there too deep, but you got to lend an ear and you got to hear the other side of the argument. And this is actually where the term red pill originated from. There was a documentary, I forget what year, pre-Trump, that came out where a woman was going to infiltrate the men's rights movement, which is different. Men's rights movement is different from MGTOW. MGTOW's like more extreme. Men's rights a little more centric. She was going to infiltrate and try to debunk them. Like, oh, you think that men don't have rights? Well, she actually lended a sympathetic ear. And the next thing you know, her whole intention turned on a dime, and she ended up making her documentary, which was called The Red Pill, about men's rights. And that is the original intention of the red pill. A lot of these pills start off meaning one thing, and then the public gets a hold of it and they reappropriate it into really crazy ways. And I was actually offended when I found out that, wait a second, red pill doesn't mean shit about Donald Trump. It doesn't mean shit about Donald Trump. What are you people talking about? So I just want to bring it back to the roots, because it's important to know the roots.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that's the
I did
original.
not know that. Fascinating.
Right. Isn't it? Doesn't it kind of change everything when you learn the context of a thing and you're like, oh, well, that's something I could kind of maybe look into a little more.
Yeah,
Right.
and the red
and you
pill,
should, like Gabe said.
the
Right.
red pill became a metaphor out of the Matrix movie. Of course, blue pill, blue balls. Sure, okay, red pill, masculine energy, good. And then these men begin to organize into message boards. But then when they go to Reddit, which is the front page of the internet, owned by China now after all these years, not realizing all the sock puppet accounts and fake accounts posting fake replies. This is like the AI bot takeover situation. So Reddit, people go there, the red pill subreddit, which becomes sort of this place where people are discussing these ideas. And as the women and the other cultural factors in, they're like, these are bad ideas. These are toxic ideas. We can't allow them on our ad supported platform. Advertisers don't like this stuff, so we're going to take them. So then they shut them up. And then they put them into these splinter cell groups, basically putting them underground, the dark web. And they're like, well, you're the incel, you're the celibate, you're the involuntary celibate. So you're the incel. And now you are a threat to our democracy, meaning our getting along. Like, we're all getting along. And then these violent incels are just with their ideas, and they're just so angry. And then, you know, they're blamed for shooting events, active shooter events in different places. So they're made into this boogeyman to be feared. And now women are like, oh man, that guy, he might be an incel. I shouldn't date him because he might have a gun. He might be armed. He might have a side piece. So now you have men's rights activists and the right to bear arms and all these masculine ideas all jumbled into a personality that they can say is that's a skinhead white nationalist incel. That's the scum of the earth. We don't want them in our cosmopolitan utopian 15-minute smart city. No, that's dangerous.
Isn't it crazy how there's always a manifesto? How the fuck is there always a manifesto? What the fuck?
Gabe, have you ever read a womanesto?
No, but I know that feminist is an anagram for manifest.
Manifest destiny.
You know, this might be a good time to bring up The Catcher in the Rye, because isn't that very phrase about some mechanism?
Yeah, the man who tried to kill a president, John Hinckley.
Yeah,
I think he's a musician now.
And he had a lot of copies of that book or something, but the
Right.
mechanism of the catcher is like there's something, I guess it sorts the seed And
Mhm.
so there's a catcher for the rye seeds. And then if it's not a rye seed, the chaff gets thrown out, right? So
Yeah.
I think the book title itself is kind of loaded, no pun intended.
Yeah, yeah,
But
good point. It's like a threshing floor for separating the sheep
Yeah.
from the wolves. Yeah.
And so I think that book itself was kind of like a bellwether of sorts, which bellwether is a neutered lead sheep. Interesting word, I guess, to use. But I think it's kind of like a symptom of society, you know. That's a very angsty youth. And I think that's why it's so popular with a lot of boys growing up, is because they can relate to this guy. And isn't the character like fixated on sex and things
Yeah,
like
there's
that?
an interesting parallel to Eyes Wide Shut, because Holden Caulfield has this encounter with a prostitute, much like Tom Cruise has his encounter with Domino.
Initiation.
Right.
But they're both kind of leading to this castration. Like they don't get it on, they don't really like get anywhere. In fact, like things get much worse after this encounter. It ends for the absolute worst, I guess. So it's interesting that this angst is directly correlated to this excess sexual energy that's not being expressed properly, like a man should.
Interesting that you mentioned Tom Cruise, who's probably cruising around for who knows what, right? And there's the idea that he's the male role model on the big screen, and he's in Top Gun, or is he a bottom? It's confused. And then in the movie Magnolia, he plays this sort of men's rights activist, pickup artist, motivational speaker, where he talks about, don't put pussy on the pedestal. And that's his whole message, is you don't put pussy on the pedestal. And then it's like, well, what else are you going to say? What are the fruits of your labor in the rest of your life? And that's like a 3-hour movie, and it goes on and it's too artsy fartsy, and you're a man, so you're not going to sit down on a couch for that long to finish a movie. So just don't even watch it. But Tom Cruise, right? You see the role model?
I always thought pussy on the pedestal came from 40-year-old virgin. So thank you for teaching me something new tonight. Yeah.
Right. It's good to know the root of that. I think that there was a inversion put into the king. And so if you look that what is called the classic king archetype, where the king sits back like a little bitch, that was a Roman thing. That was not something that heathen armies did. Your heathen armies, them were the biggest, baddest dudes. Like if you were at the head of if that dude was at the head of a heathen army, you did not want to play with him. Bad plan. Like he was the most competent guy on that field. And he didn't sit back and let everybody else do his work for him. The king did the most work, and he was the most competent, not only because I live like a king, like where I'm in command of my entire land. And I know how to do every job everybody else does, including when Christy moved in. I know how to cook. I know how to do all my own laundry, all those kind of things. I know how to do all those things. I'm competent at every single thing. So when you look at, and that's the way a king should be. Part of why you're able to lead is because you know. Now, the warrior is, again, I like where Gabe went with the Mars and Deadpool and being scarred. And that is, again, I like where you guys went with that. The reason that Christy's able to be who she is and be soft is because I'm fucking hard, and nothing gets to her. That is, I am the hard line. And so that is the warrior archetype. The magician archetype, again, I agree with what you guys saying, is able to utilize resources in magical ways. And at the end of the day, no matter how hard I am out there, I am the lover. When I go in and Christy needs that sensitive side and I need that sensitive side, that is also part of it. And that's able to be expressed because I've done the other things. So to me, the king is always, there's been a real inversion, and that's the tarot even is not that old. Even the Solabuska deck is not particularly old. And you look at the pre 1000, where Rome basically owned everything. The king was not that dude that we're exposed to now, not that primped up little bitch. It's a dude that his whole life trained to become the leader and caretaker of his people. So that's an entirely different thing. I really enjoy the men are from Mars and women are from Venus thing. That's part of my presentation. When you look at that, that's the heart center. And the Mars ties alchemically to iron. And what iron is doing is it's drawing in oxygen. Iron automatically pulls oxygen and it pushes hydrogen. So what oxygen is doing in your blood is it's the warrior. When something needs broken down, that's what oxygen is doing. When you eat food, you're trying to get that food down to the sugars and the minerals. Everything else is carbon and cellular material. You're going to take and get that carbon out, and then you're going to poop out that cellular material. When I do an extraction, like when I'm doing turning a basic thing into an alcohol, the yeast in there is just farting out carbon like mad. It's called a carbon lock. And you don't want oxygen in there because then mold will grow, but carbon is continually being released out of that system so you can get down to the good stuff, and it fills that area, and you can put a lock on that lets air go one way and not the other way, so the carbon can go out and the oxygen not go in. Nonetheless, this oxygen is doing this vehicle work of carrying away the carbon. Even when you get down to glucose needs to be turned into ATP, so that way it's not stable and your body is able to attach it. It can't attach stable particles. It needs to destabilize it, and that carbon molecule was in there stabilizing it. So just like when you're decarbonating cannabis, where cannabis, when you pick it off the plant and eat it, it won't be psychoactive. You need to decarbonate it, which means get rid of that little carbon molecule, and now it's unstable, and it's like, oh, let me attach to your cannabinoid receptor. Bling, good times. And so everything works that way. So that carbon is doing a very specific job. On the flip side, women is the Venus, which is tied to copper, which in your heart then it's pulling in hydrogen and pushing out oxygen. And so what the hydrogen's doing is, after the oxygen has broken this shit down into something useful, has separated all the wheat from the chaff, and we just have that like little glucose molecule. Well, now it needs something to be able to transition in, be incorporated. And that's where hydrogen comes in. Hydrogen allows that transition and allows it to be incorporated into your system. So women are for togetherness. Everybody come together. Everybody love, incorporate. And so this is very much the feminine side of things. And through the polarity of the two things is where you're getting your actual heart power going, is through the polarity of those things. Because inside that polarity, even though they're opposites, even though I'm the opposite of Christy, it's through the union of these two opposites where we're working together, even though we're doing the opposite thing, that the whole thing is fucking beautiful and it works.
Hey, I have a question. Do you have children, Ben?
7.
Wow, that's awesome, dude. So I was hoping
7 grandkids too.
I was hoping you and John could talk about that, because I was just thinking, like, I think that's also part of what is maybe missing from our society, is how if you don't have a child, it's like you don't. I think if I had a child, I would kill for a child. You see what I mean? But like without that, I don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's replaced instead by like, well, you'll die for your country or whatever, you know? So I think by sometimes robbing us of the filial connections and love, they then try to replace that with the nanny state and old Grandpa Joe Biden. And it's like, well, you'll die for Grandpa Joe Biden. And but really what we should be willing to die for is our wife, our children, those sorts of things. And so can you guys maybe comment on like did you notice something that just inherently changed when you had a child, like something more protective developed or anything like that, maybe? Like that
I'll let
divine
John go.
masculine aspect.
He has not spoken. I will go after John.
For me, it was a change. As soon as you look into your child's eyes, you either accept it and go with it, and you'll either do anything for it that you can, and you'd even die for it, or you're going to run from it. And for me, it's a beautiful, how could you not want to be part of that? I think that everybody should experience at least having one kid.
Yeah, that's the ritual or rite of initiation I just haven't had yet. So I'm envious in a way of you guys.
All in due time, brother.
And men can now, in fact,
Oh yeah.
have children.
Plot
So
twist.
that's an opportunity for men to bear children.
They don't even have to miss out right now.
It was super interesting. So my ex-wife got pregnant with my first child. Our first child. We were high school sweethearts. We were 16 and having unprotected sex, the good stuff. And she got pregnant, and this was in 1991. So, or maybe early 92. Yeah, it must have been early 92 because she was born in December. So the abortion issue and the women's right issue was something that was in every school speech was about it, like fucking every debate topic. It was abortion, women's rights, and AIDS. Every school had the AIDS dude that came out and told you how everybody on the planet was going to have AIDS within 2 years because AIDS dudes were going to start sleeping with girls, and then they were going to give it to you even if you weren't gay, and all that nonsense.
Propaganda.
Yeah. So when Diane got pregnant, and I had not, we were stupid kids, and even though we've been dating for a while, a couple of years, I think, it's, you're kids. You don't stop and look at the morality and what the person wants in life so much. You're just like, oh, she touches my penis, it's good, she's pretty. Like, so when she got pregnant, I had nightmares. Right, exactly. Like that's the entire thought process. So I had nightmares when she got pregnant, and about her having an abortion. I had a nightmare about it's one I don't even dream ever, or if I do, I don't remember it. And I broke into an abortion clinic where she was like laying on the table, and there's doctors there, and I looked in the trash can, and I know this isn't how they do it, but like, it's my fucking like 16-year-old dream, right? And there's my baby in a trash can, and I just start murking everything in that fucking room. Like the nurses, everybody, just like, you all fucking die. And ever since then, and again, this is the same with my farm. Again, it's called husbandry for a reason. You take on this position where the things you chose, like every animal on this farm is here because I chose it to be here. And when that child came, that's because I chose to start acting, even though I wasn't a man. And I took the responsibility. My dad didn't pay for my child, even though I was 16. I worked 80 hours a week. I worked an overnight shift and went to high school. Like, fuck that. But you take, as a man, you take and decide you're going to do something like bring a woman into your home, then you had best be able to be a man and take care of her the way a woman's supposed to be taken care of, to provide her with the situation that she needs to live in. And then further, when you start bringing in children and animals, that just compounds the entire situation entirely. And so you just best up your damn game. And I honestly think that the later children is part of society where it's like a Peter Pan syndrome, because I was 16 and I was working 2 jobs and having kids, and yeah, that was pretty young, But where I'm from, most people I know don't have kids by the time they're 21, 22. They've already got one, and they're acting like adults. My oldest daughter, she's 30. She has she has her own home. She has a couple kids. She's married. The whole classic American life. My son, he's got 2 houses, a couple kids. He's getting ready to get married. He didn't get married yet. Well, he was married. He got divorced. He's getting ready to get remarried. Only my kids that are 18 don't have kids. Like, so I think that's a thing where you just don't take the responsibility. You end up with this very Peter Pan syndrome with it, where you never have to do that. And men, we thrive on that shit. Like where I understand what a woman might be traumatized in her and have to go through like TMRE or whatever the fuck, and she's gonna like be totally the patriarchy and hate men forever if somebody threw her in the pool. But that's where men rise. When you put, as an alchemist, when you put fire to the feminine side flees. It runs, it vaporizes, and it's gone. When you put fire to the salt side, that's what makes the masculine side come together. That's what makes the masculine side become the masculine side. And so we need that fire. You need to throw us in the pool.
I just want to say I'm thankful. One day back in 2022, I was talking to Gabe. We were planning to do a fun show about Dante's Inferno. Speaking of fire, and how the Inferno is then leading to the purgatory, and where you purge all this nonsense that's going to be baggage on your climb up to this mountain of purgatory, and then ultimately you're descending to the heavenly bodies, the celestial spheres. And I love that idea that you have to burn away, like in the alchemical sense. It's awesome, Ben. Yeah, it's like spot on right there for sure.
That's absolutely perfect for Nigredo. And it releases you from the world's shit and you become a real man. I'm a real boy.
There's something interesting about Peter Pan too. I know we've been going on for quite a while, and I want to get into the Book of Five Rings, maybe as a way to orient a solution as our conclusion, using the wisdom of these 5 weapons. And but quickly on Captain Hook and Peter Pan, again, Jordan Peterson was a big influence for me in 2018. And, I've been kind of shedding this persona that I've maybe built up around him, being like a fanboy. And I'll be honest, he's helped me a lot to see the mythological structure that weaves throughout narratives in our modern culture and in our ancient past. But one thing that I really liked was when he was talking about Peter Pan, there were a couple different cool points he was making. One was about, I'll just start small, like Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell was the proverbial fairy of porn that was constantly distracting Peter Pan and keeping him in this infantile state. And, it was eventually like, it was either, all right, you got to choose Tinkerbell or a real woman, Wendy. Like, where are you going to go, Peter Pan? What are you going to choose? Which direction, Western man? And now he's looking up to like, what is he going to become in the future? And as Jordan Peterson says, he's like, well, who the hell wants to become Captain Hook? He's being chased around by this fucking alligator who's tortured and absolutely he is in the grips of Saturn himself, time in this alligator's clock. Like who wants to be Captain Hook when you're an adult? So might as well stay a child forever, I really liked how he framed all that. And I'm glad you brought up Peter Pan, because I think that's an excellent way to look at this nanny state. What do you guys think?
I think I would be very cautious of talking to any Disney adults who are hashtag adulting. If we're looking for solutions,
For real.
the people that show up offering solutions are oftentimes the grifters, the snake oil salesmen, the opportunists. So to have the wisdom and the patience to know what is an offer and to know to actively refuse all offers. If it's an offer of sex, hey, hand job, hey, whatever, hey, you, and like that, that's an offer. And as a man, you say, no, no, I don't need this honey trap in my life right now. Don't need this Tinkerbell. I don't want any stripper glitter on me, you know, that sort of thing. You need to be able to say no to those temptations and not be considered a prude or a moralist or some strange frigid person. No, these are self
Stripper
boundaries.
glitter is the devil. I don't even believe in the
Who
devil.
cares what they think, anyways, right?
Well, it's the peer pressure thing. So the solutions are, you know, positive peer pressure, which is to say there's 6 of us together having this discussion. So maybe your goal is to become a bit of a leader in your peer group to say, hey guys, if we can be the iron that sharpens the iron, the iron here, if we can help each other out, right? Not every guy's gonna do that. A lot of guys are gonna flake out. But to hang out with people with the intention of let's be consistent here. You know, maybe start a band, whatever. Do something, get a hobby. Work together. And that's a question a lot of people ask, a lot of guys ask, hey, what's the problem, man? I'm out of college. I'm at a place where I don't have any friends. I don't have any male friends. Well, how do you make friendships and relationships? A job site. You work together, volunteer, have an active goal that you can achieve together, and by working side by side, then you build relationships. You see value in this person, they see value in you, and now you're separating the wheat from the chaff. So I think that's a good solution to start with.
Right on. And I know Joshua brought up this ritual, and you're saying it sounded kind of funny. I want to share that I've gone through the same thing. I was led up this mountain at a YMCA sleepaway camp, blindfolded with a rope to guide me, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't necessarily just this rope, but it was the people behind me and in front of me, and we were moving as one unit, and we were guiding each other. And I think that's a cool symbol in the fact that like we're gonna climb this proverbial mountain together, and you have to depend on the person in front of you. You have to depend on yourself to not trip and fall and ruin it for everyone else. But at the same time, it's definitely a brotherhood. It takes a village to make this all happen. So it was a cool ritual for that purpose, of being having the humility to put your faith and your trust into your fellow man and your neighbors and your brothers and your the other men around you who are going to guide you and lead you to where you need to go. But of course, taking the personal responsibility for yourself. So I'm glad you brought that up earlier, Josh, and I appreciate the sentiment, Alan. It's really it's powerful to be able to have shared projects and shared missions that we can
Yeah,
make the
and
world better.
to be fully transparent, that's why we're all meeting regularly in these Zoom rooms, building a conversation and community together, finding solutions, finding problems, defining them, and then expanding our consciousness by expanding our vocabulary and expanding our stories, asking each other, well, what was it like for you? And combining our wisdom together. So again, 2023 might be difficult, might be a scary world out there. You might not even have a car or a driver's license. People are like, oh, join a Discord server, play a game together, play World of Warcraft, join a guild. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe just take the Jake Loco route and start a podcast.
Definitely cured my depression, I can tell you that. And I met some pretty cool folks along the way. So, thankful for you guys. And, Gabe, I want to give you the opportunity because you brought up the Book of Five Rings in our Telegram chat before while we were planning this out. I think that was you, right? That was, yeah. So, I definitely want to hear you out on that because I personally haven't been able to read it, but I know I've said this to you before. Any kind of like, what's it called? Any like retweets are not what's the word, any promotion that you have, any recommendation,
Not an endorsement.
an endorsement, thank you, yes. Anyways, Gabe, what do you think about the Book of Five Rings?
It's a fabulous study on strategy. That I had a hardcore Japanese martial arts phase in my younger days. I used to go up on rooftops and play Ghost Dog and do fucking parkour samurai sessions. And one night I fucking was doing a badass move. It was a cool ass move, but I cracked my fucking skull on the back of my head, and hard. And I go home in a daze, and the next morning I come out and there's a blood trail. And I realized that I was a fucking bad ninja, man. Bad ninja. Anybody could have tracked me that night. It was a bad thing. But one thing that is fascinating is that these books, The Art of War, you know, has 13 chapters. That's a lunar nod, you know, and corporate executives, they proliferate the wisdom in these books. And so, you know, we are in a spiritual war, and it is foundational to know the strategy of your opponent. And the Book of Five Rings, likewise. And the Book of Five Rings is it's a shorter read. It's more concise. It gets right to the fucking point. It's no bullshit. But one thing that's kind of neat is, you know, we were talking about the king, lover, magi, warrior. Well, those are elemental. You know, I was taking notes as we were talking about it, and you know, the king is earth. It's a land claim. The lover is water. It's a vessel. It's receptive. The magi, at first I thought was wind, but I'm more inclined to think that the magi is fire, and the warrior will be wind. And those are actually, it's kind of neat because the Book of the Five Rings is the book of water, the book of earth, the book of wind, the book of fire, and the last book is the book of the void. And that is, some would say, the spirit or the mind or the soul, you know, the fifth element, so
the
to
all
say.
mother.
The all
The all mother.
mother.
Kanungabat. Yeah.
Hail,
Mhm.
hail. Yes.
Life essence.
Yeah. And so these are universal. You know, this is rooted in Japan, but these things are universal. And we know that the executives study these things. And so it's very prescient that we gain mastery of these systems as well. And something that occurred to me late in life, years after I had walked away from the sword play, the Five Rings, that's the path of Venus. The kiss of Venus generates a 5-petaled spirographic lotus every 8 years. And I can never say his name right. Musashi Miyamoto. He repeats in the book, study these things intensively. Like you think you got this on the first try, but nah, son, nah. You want to go back, you want to reread it again. Once you get more mature, you get more context, you get more perspective. And sure enough, it was like 20 years after my first read, I come back and I'm like, Five Rings is the path of Venus. And it took me half my life to even realize that the magic of this stuff is universal. And so, yeah, I just thought I would throw that in the mix, you know, that we've already kind of come through the 4 aspects, and the culmination is in the void, you know, in the stillness and the silence. And, you know,
Spirit.
that's in the spirit. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, yeah, I thought I would maybe throw that all in the mix. It's a good book. I recommend it. And if you've already read it once, go back, get some more, give it another whirl.
Right on. Yeah, Josh, you said you had a question for Gabriel.
Yeah, I've read some of that book. So what I can remember, one of the aspects is, aren't you supposed to finish the first ring before you move to the second ring? And some of those things might also include, like, you would have to master a sword in one hand or 2 hands before you get to master it in one hand a piece, or something like that. I just remember there was actually practical exercises that, like, you had to master certain things before you were allowed to move on to something else. And I just think that that is a good like disciplinary type attitude to have. Like, not very often are we taught that. Like in school, for instance, you're just taught to regurgitate information and become a mindless drone. You know, you're not really taught how to achieve things or how to build upon your successes and
Skills.
things like that. Maybe could you expand on that anymore? Like, were you able to gain any inspirations like that, for instance, because that's really the takeaway for me is I remember sitting in the bookstore on the floor reading it. I never bought it, but I did sit there and read it.
Well, yes. One thing that I do know that his school evolved eventually to have like a very select few were able to be accepted into his level of stewardship or teaching. But one thing that it helped me with is like spiritualizing the concepts of these elements, and knowing about how the heat of the moment, when you're in the fire and your passions are burning, that it's in fact breath, it's in fact air that you need to so that you're not flustered. And so then we think of air elements and wind elements, but that is just as simple as breathe, and then you have control of the fire and what direction it's going to flow. And these elemental things are like, they're so rich and they're so deep, and with age you gain more and more command, and you recognize them in another person. You can see the other person's fire, and you can console them and guide them and give them direction. And another thing about the two swords that was unique to him, he was like kind of, I don't know, stigmatized as being kind of rogue for not being a two-handed overhead as the first fundamental. And that's really fascinating too, because he had followed the rules long enough that he knew when to break them, and that like was breaking paradigms in his day. And people were making a big fuss over it, but he had gained mastery enough to be able to break the rules. And I'll throw this out too. If you actually look at the dialogue from A Princess Bride, from the sword fight, the famous sword fighting scene where he's like, "Well, what are you smiling about? I know something you do not know." "Oh yeah, what is that?" "I'm not left-handed." And the music changes and he goes left-handed and everything shifts. Well, if you actually look up the dialogue they're having, and you actually study the schools of swordsmanship that they're talking about, you'll find out that in swordcraft, all around the world, everybody was using an overhand technique, fighting up high. And somebody came along and they were like, you know what? The last thing they expect is for you to come from down low. And so this is like the underdogs started to study the underhanded tricks. And this was in Japan, this was the ninjas. But I'm getting all over the place. But yeah, once you gain mastery of what the rules are at a certain point in your life, then you know how to break them to take advantage of and do what is not expected. Get me going. I'll go all night talking about
Thank
sword
you.
play.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Do you think this kind of relates to the idea of, some people might say it's not worth your time or energy looking at world events from a conspiratorial lens or putting symbolism together or trying to connect dots, because what's the point? But then you kind of think like, well, if you study your enemy, then you're becoming a greater warrior. That's to put it in simple terms, right? So maybe there is something to all this.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I hear not to harp on anybody, but I hear Sam Tripoli say, "I don't think they're that smart. I don't think they're that smart. I don't give them enough credit." But I would retort very politely. I love Sam. I totally love Sam. But I would retort with, I want my enemy to be the best fucking enemy I could ever choose. And if they're not that smart, then they're not worthy of my kung fu. And so I'm always keeping myself sharp by not underestimating my opponent.
Well said. Well said. And I think that's a perfect way to, Balderson, What were you gonna say? Because I saw you just unmuted yourself. I don't want to wrap us up while we're still
I was just
on
going to
the gravy
say that
train.
I think where Sam is kind of mistaken. I've actually been kind of impressed with Sam lately. But where Sam's, I think, slightly mistaken is the public figureheads that we see definitely are not that smart. Definitely. But
Yes.
there is somebody, some chess master behind the scenes that knows that a scorpion, like the tail of the scorpion and the frog, isn't to tell you that the scorpion is evil. It's to know a thing for what it is and put it in its place. And some brilliant motherfucker put Joe Biden in his place in order to get the reactions from the public that Joe Biden is drawing. So there is some fucking chess master back there who does know.
That's what's up.
Obama.
Well, as we look across this very complex game board, and we're all looking at how we fit into this grand strategy, I think it's safe to say that we've shared a lot of strategy tonight that we can all benefit from. And anyone listening, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be able to make masculinity divine again, and perhaps preserve some beauty and truth and goodness that may have been lost in this industrial revolution. So, Balderson, do you want to start? Let's go around and maybe give our last well wishes, a final thought, maybe a final piece of advice for men out there or ladies who are looking to support this future, this flourishing of divinity that is within all of us. That what can we do, what can we say, and how can we leave people on the highest note possible?
In essence, the true masculine is to do. And so if we as a society want to start becoming more masculine, we need to quit worrying about what everybody else is doing. I don't think about anybody else's approval when I go out and do things around my farm and I start doing projects. I go do what I do. And if it works, it works. And that's what men do. We need to start being more being about it. If you want to be respected for your thoughts as a man, you need to live them. Nobody gives a shit what you say. Truly, they don't. It's when you live something, that's when they pay attention. Love you guys.
Amen, brother. Love you too, Baldy. John, what do you think, my friend?
Couldn't have said it better than my brother Balderson. Basically, I think that we as men need to take more actions and stop seeking approval from others. We need to just blaze our own trail and see where it takes us. Let our spirit be the guide. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you for having me on the show.
Appreciate you, brother. It was cool meeting you tonight. I'm glad you were able to share.
Thank you, brother.
We should do it again. Hey, Gabriel,
Anytime.
What would you say to close things out? What kind of gravy do you still have left over? There's always still gas in our tank, right? There's always still gas.
Totally. I guess one hanging chad that I had in my notes here was a lot of us know about Gloria Steinem at this point. A lot of us know that she was admittedly, by her own words, on the payroll with the CIA, rubbing elbows with the journalists who covered up the assassination of MLK. We know all of this, but I want to get a little more incendiary with it. And I want to point out what Gloria Steinem did by telling, not only that doubling the tax revenue for the man by sending women into the workforce, but sending women into the military to that degree with her mentality. I want people to think of how that rhymes with the right of prima nocta and how the old kings put out a decree into the populace telling them that if you want to get married, then the duchy of your territory gets to fuck your wife on your wedding night. And I want you to think about Gloria Steinem sending women out into the workforce, sending women into the military, actually was a modern day version of the right of prima nocta. I think we should get maybe a little more aggressive with pointing our fingers. I think we should point out how this shit rhymes with legitimate fucking evil from the olden medieval days. So they want to get medieval, let's get fucking medieval. And then I'm gonna put that hanging chat aside. You can spread that wildfire all you like. And the last thing I wanted to point out is I think myself, one thing I'm doing is I'm facing a lot of this darkness. I'm looking right into the abyss. I'm having a good old fucking time with it. I'm fucking studying Nietzsche, nihilism. Whoo, it's dark. It's scary. It's awesome. It's fucking hardcore. But something that has occurred to me while I'm having fun with all that, I've started to fast. And I find, Baldy, you're going to get toxoplasmosis, bro. But I've started to fast periodically, and I'm doing it with baby steps. Don't go diving head first into anything. This is not medical advice, but one aspect of masculinity in the aspect of the void, that fifth ring, is when not to. And if you are obedient to your urges, you are an animal, and you don't have that claim to the higher compulsion and command over yourself. And so you can't go around telling other people how to do things if you can't even control your own self. And so I find fasting to be a really powerful and empowering practice. And then this is also can, in some cases, be done not only with food, but with your words. And, one day of a vow of silence, it could serve you well in the heat of the moment when you got to bite your fucking tongue sometime. So that's another thing to self-empower. So I just passed that gem forward.
Well said. Well said. Wow, you guys blow my mind tonight. I love it.
That was like 3, 4, 5 recommendations. You took 2 of mine. I was going to say the paradox of, what advice would you offer? And I was, well, the paradox is, I wouldn't offer any advice. I wouldn't offer unsolicited advice. I wouldn't go around telling people, you're wrong about this, but actually here's the facts, and I'm going to correct you on this because I know so much. Let your words be few, be slow to anger, and listen a lot more. Observe, be more observant, and then see how other people are reacting to you, and be more socially aware of what's going around you. If you keep your eyes on the ground and you're not seeing what's happening, you're stuck in the mud. You're not going anywhere. So part of making progress is by listening. So in a workplace or an environment where there's other people, you're socializing, it's better to be liked than to be correct. So just zip your lip, listen, and allow other people to explain their character to you. And then when it's necessary, you can open up a little bit, but be a mystery. Be a bit of a mystery and embrace the mystery of not knowing. You don't have to know everything to get started and do something.
It's a good way to travel the eternal void for sure. Embrace the mystery. Right on, my friend. Joshua, what do you think? How would you like to wrap things up?
Well, I'd just like to first say I'm glad my dad didn't wrap it up, or I wouldn't be here with you all right now. So thank you to my dad. And I would just like to say that, while listening to this, if you have been thinking of men in your life that you think embody these traits or qualities, then take a moment sometime to recognize those things, because sure, maybe a lot of praise isn't effective in some ways, like we mentioned earlier. But I think sometimes we don't even know something's there to recognize. So like by just having awareness brought to something, like who in your life might be a good positive male role model, maybe let them know, hey, I really appreciate the beacon that you are, and I can see that you're having an effect on the young people. So if you just know somebody that's a dad, thank them. Hey, thank you for not being a POS and raising your child. And so just recognizing those things and learning to build up those strengths in others, because I think that that's really what is so. We're talking about the void a minute ago. I think that's what's really contributing to the void today, is this lack of divine masculine. It reminds me of like the Egyptian creation story where Autumn, he's in the abyss, and mastering it and carving out creation and stuff like that. And I think that when you don't have that, you do lose that creative thing. And it's probably why we're not seeing anything. I know there's nothing new under the sun, as they say, but I think that's part of also why we're not really seeing anything new these days. I mean, movies are copies of copies, and everything's just a remanufactured version of itself, because there's no, that divine masculine there is not creating, the juices aren't flowing. So if you see a creative male, thank him for embodying that. If you see a male being a good role model to somebody and playing basketball with kids or whatever, thank them for being a good steward in the community, to these children, because those folks are going to grow up one day, and if they didn't have good role models, then I mean, that could, those kids growing up fatherless in a sense, in terms of the role not being there, that could lead to your community not being safe in 10, 15 years from now, so I think that a little bit of time that we spend now doing these things can be have a large impact rather, and we really shouldn't underestimate that. So I just would say that if you've been inspired or recognize any of these elements in people and inspired by it, take the time out to thank them, or maybe just share with them what you were listening, share the podcast with them, just say, hey, this reminded me of you. Maybe that could give a man some solidarity. Maybe he's at the end of his rope and now he feels some camaraderie with 6 random men he listens to on the internet about this topic, so there's a bit of a crisis, I think, in our society at large, and then even in the world, but I think that there's hope. After all, that's the hero's journey, right? So there's always that crisis period of time, and when the odds are kind of stacked against you, and I feel like our children are really the future right now, and the best thing that we can be doing is imparting those values to them. So pull out a book, share some of the old stories with your children, the hero stories, the Havamal, the Bible, whatever it might be. Just be sure to sow these seeds in these children so that when they grow up, they'll have some type of anchor, like with that rope in the woods and the blindfold, that rope. If you didn't have that rope, you could get off the path, So I don't want to get all like preachy, but that would be my takeaway, is like the role model thing, I think, is really what I'm leaving with this evening. And I'm going to try to, my goal this week is going to try to do that for somebody, like let them know, hey, I can see the effect you're having on the world. Thank you for that.
Thank you guys. This has been awesome. And as I kind of think to myself, I'm assuming I'm the youngest here. I should be the one who's shutting up and listening the most. But as a way of wrapping this up and kind of putting my money where my mouth is, proverbially, like my message is really just I want to show you guys what I've created. So I'm gonna end on a quick story. This is a quick Twitter thread that I put together in preparation for this chat. I was very inspired all week about, certain themes. So here's my weave on Aladdin. Remember the classic story of the genie in the bottle? A young, mischievous degenerate named Aladdin, accompanied by his pet monkey Abu, explores a mysterious cave containing a powerful, generative tool capable of granting Aladdin his heart's desire. A guardian of this cave of wonders explains a simple, straightforward warning to Aladdin and Abu. Do not, under any circumstances, touch anything in the cave, only the magic lamp. Sounds easy. Of course, as any monkey would, Abu cannot resist the temptation. Abu succumbed to his monkey mind by grasping for a large jewel. And the hubris of this impulsivity sets off a trap, and the cave collapses, pushing Aladdin into further danger and jeopardizing their entire mission. Impulse control is the key here, and clearly the monkey mind's lustful greed stands in the way of Aladdin securing the most valuable treasure known to man. Genius and genie both trace back to Latin roots similar to Genesis, meaning to give birth, to generate, and to procreate. Everyone is a genius. Each individual contains the spark of infinity and divinity, and our inner genie is our innate talents, gifts, and passions. So to wrap it up, what's the lesson? Feed your inner genie, release it from the monkey mind, do whatever lights up your soul, tap into that flow state energy, and create. Just keep on creating, create. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, for creating this wonderful weave. We've done quite a lot tonight, the 6 of us, and I just want to thank each and every one of you and anyone listening right now. I appreciate you guys, love you guys, and I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. Cheers, y'all.
Radachusker.
Radachusker.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Radichisker.